Tyrion Lannister had never expected to feel cold like this again. In the old days, he thought the chill of the north had seeped into his bones so completely that no further freeze could touch him. But as the wind beyond the wall whipped across his face, its icy sting reminded him just how cruel winter could be. The fortifications of Castle Black lay behind them now, a dark line of stone and wood overshadowed by the colossal wall itself. The group had set forth at dawn, headed into the wild, with the pale sun offering little warmth. Though he tried not to show it, Tyrion's teeth chattered against the inside of his cheeks, and he pulled his cloak closer, imagining a roaring fire and a cask of wine. Jon Snow led the party, perched on his horse a few paces ahead. Ghost, Jon's direwolf, walked with silent grace alongside him, red eyes scanning the snowy wastes as though hunting for shapes in the drifts. Wildlings accompanied them too, some the free folk had assigned as guides, others as watchers to ensure the Night's Watch's intentions were good. There was an uneasy tension in the air, but it was a tension laced with hope. Tyrion didn't miss how Jon kept a careful eye on everything around them, always ready to step in if trouble arose. That was Jon's role now, peacemaker and guardian. Yet, Tyrion had a purpose as well, to bridge the gap between the living in all corners of the north. He reminded himself that forging alliances often involved many nights of conversation, bottles of strong drink, and very likely, a cunning lie or two. But for now, the trip to parley with the free folk felt more straightforward. Survive the cold, listen carefully, and reassure them that this fragile bond could hold against the next storm. They had set out on horseback, each rider wrapped in heavy furs. The wind howled across the barren landscape. No trees, no villages, only an endless expanse of white, broken here and there by jagged stones poking out of the snow. Tyrion tried not to think of the stories he'd heard about the others and the whites, all the horrors that might still lurk in the furthest wastes. If Jon said it was safe, then Tyrion was inclined to believe him, though safe was a relative term, especially beyond the wall. He recalled the conversation that had brought him here. Once, in the aftermath of the War for the Dawn, a sense of camaraderie had taken shape between the kingdoms south of the wall and the free folk who had fought at their side. Now that the greatest threat had been turned away, old wounds and resentments lingered. Tyrion, wearing the mantle of hand to whomever sat the throne in King's Landing, though, in truth, that arrangement was less stable than he let on, had decided to come north on a delicate mission. Jon Snow, his friend, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch in deed if not in name, had insisted that if they truly wished for lasting peace, they had to secure the trust of the free folk in more than words. A joint expedition, a gesture of unity and opportunity for each side to speak frankly. It sounded like madness Tyrion was used to considering all the ways men turned on each other for far less. But he also knew madness sometimes paved the way for progress in a war-torn land. Ahead, Jon Snow raised a gloved hand in a silent signal. The line of riders halted. Tyrion scanned the horizon, seeing only rolling snowbanks. A handful of wildlings with weathered faces, dressed in thick pelts, moved forward cautiously. Their leader, a tall woman with braided gray hair, let her gaze drift across the expanse. She carried a spear strapped to her back and wore a curved dagger at her hip. Tyrion had spoken to her briefly before they set out. Her name was Sonda of the Frostfangs, and she carried herself with a proud, alert bearing. It was she who had cautioned Jon about traveling in these lands, though she also declared that the free folk had no wish for more bloodshed. Their numbers had been savaged by war and winter. If the southern lords truly offered a chance for a better relationship, some among them were ready to listen. Jon turned in the saddle to address Tyrion. "We'll make camp soon. Sonda says there's some shelter in a ravine not far from here." Tyrion nodded. "Shelter sounds good. I'm not sure my face can handle much more of this wind. It might freeze off and shatter like a piece of glass." Jon allowed himself a small smile. "It's not much warmer down there, but it'll keep the wind out." Then he turned his gaze toward the rest of the party. "All right, let's move." The company proceeded, winding through low hills until the ground dropped sharply. True to her word, Sonda led them to a narrow ravine where an icy stream trickled beneath sheets of half-frozen water. Rock walls rose on either side, providing some protection. Many of the wildlings dismounted and walked into the heart of this hidden place, scanning for any ambush or lurking threat. Tyrion was grateful that only the distant hush of wind reached them. If they were attacked here, it could be deadly, but at least it offered a reprieve from the gale. Once they decided the area was safe, Jon asked the men and women of the Night's Watch to gather wood and set a perimeter. Tyrion saw how quickly the free folk pitched in as well. Despite old bitterness, some strange accord was forming in these small actions. People from opposite sides of countless battles were now working side by side. Perhaps the world had changed more than any of them realized. A handful of campfires sprang to life. Tyrion clapped his hands together, letting the warm glow soothe his frozen fingers. Ghost prowled nearby, occasionally sniffing at the wildlings but mostly content to remain near Jon. As the flames spread their orange illumination across stone walls and horse flanks, Tyrion noticed the faint tension around Jon's eyes. He thought he recognized it, the weariness of a man who felt responsible for everyone's safety. Quiet conversations broke out around the fires. Tyrion approached a cluster of men from the Night's Watch. Young recruits with tired eyes, some older veterans who had outlasted the War of the Five Kings and the War for the Dawn. He offered a smile, then asked about their journey north. They spoke politely, still retaining a healthy respect for him as a highborn official. But Tyrion sensed a certain reservation. The Night's Watch had lost so many. Those who remained were reluctant to put their faith in yet another uncertain alliance, especially one involving the free folk they had once fought tooth and nail. After a time, Tyrion noticed Sonda sitting near her own small fire with a couple of her people. Another woman and a man whose face was scarred from brow to chin. They were huddled in close, sharing what looked like a skin of liquor. Taking a breath, Tyrion made his way over, his boots crunching in the snow. The three wildlings looked up, their expressions neutral but not unwelcoming. Tyrion inclined his head. "I was hoping to warm my hands a bit," he said. Sonda gestured with a curt nod. "Fire's there for anyone who needs it." Her voice carried a northern accent, clipped and direct. Tyrion settled himself on a flat stone across from her. The heat felt like a blessing on his cheeks. He took off his gloves, flexing his fingers. For a moment, they listened to the crackle of the flames. The other woman, a stocky person with braided black hair, drummed her fingers against the side of the liquor skin as though deciding whether to share. Finally, Sonda spoke, eyes fixed on Tyrion's face. "They call you Tyrion Lannister, yes? I've heard stories about your silver tongue, and how you helped bring the armies south together to fight the dead." Tyrion shrugged. "I've told many stories in my time, and it's true I've been known to talk my way out of a situation or two. But the way I see it, the fight for the living was bigger than any single tongue. It took a lot of people." Sonda's lips pressed together. Her companion sipped from the liquor skin. "Maybe so," she said softly. "But you're the one from down south who's come up here. That means something to us, if you really mean to help." Tyrion nodded, carefully framing his words. "Jon Snow believed we should do more than sign agreements. He said that we needed to come in person to show our faces. I'm inclined to agree. Treaties are fragile things if they're written by men who never meet those they're binding." He extended his hands to the fire. "The free folk fought and bled alongside all the rest of us. You deserve to be heard. My hope is that we can have discussions, real discussions about trade, safe passage, or simply a promise that we won't return to the old ways of harassing each other." The scarred man snorted. "Safe passage for whom? I've seen your men ride out from the Shadow Tower, rounding up free folk who never wanted to bend the knee." "I can't deny that old habits die hard," Tyrion said. "But that doesn't mean they can't die. Jon has taken steps to ensure no more forced roundups happen. The Watch is meant to guard the realms of men. It's not supposed to be an instrument of tyranny." Sonda watched him closely. "And what of you then? Your hand to the queen, or the king, or whomever sits on that prickly throne now?" "The exact occupant of the throne in King's Landing has changed a few times," Tyrion admitted with a slight smile. "But my influence in council remains. And so does my determination to see that we don't go back to slaughtering each other for foolish reasons." She seemed to mull this over, passing the liquor skin to the stocky woman, who took a swallow. The smell of strong spirits drifted across the fire. Tyrion's mouth watered. He wouldn't mind a drink. But he kept his desire subdued, wanting to appear more interested in her words than in a free flask. Eventually Sonda spoke, voice low. "There's a gathering of leaders among the free folk. Some came from even farther north, from the corners still haunted by shadows. They'll meet in a day or two's travel by the old watchtower near a frozen lake. a place we call the Lake of Mists. Might be a chance for you and Jon Snow to speak to all who matter among the free folk." Tyrion's ears pricked up. That was precisely what he hoped for, a chance to speak to more than a handful, to put the question of peace on the table. "You'd be willing to lead us there?" he asked. Sonda glanced at her companions, who gave subtle nods. "Aye," she said. "But know this, they'll want answers, Lannister. They won't be won over by pretty words alone. There are old wounds, old distrust. The free folk don't forget. It took a great darkness to force us to stand side by side with the men of the South. Now that that darkness is gone, some wonder if your people even remember the vow to leave us in peace." Tyrion inhaled the pungent smell of the fire, letting it ground him. "They might doubt. Rightly so. I'll do my best to show that we're serious about peace. It's why I came, after all. I'd rather we all face the next winter without each other's knives in our backs." Sonda nodded once. The conversation might have continued, but at that moment Jon approached from behind, Ghost following quietly. He inclined his head to the wildlings. "All well here?" he asked, his voice gentle but still carrying an authority that would have been unthinkable from the old perspective of the Night's Watch. "We're discussing a meeting," Tyrion said, turning to glance up at Jon. "Sonda believes we can speak with all the free folk leaders if we travel a bit farther north." Jon's face brightened, though it remained sober. "That's good news. We'll have to be cautious. We're not exactly a large party. If some among the free folk view us as a threat, we might need to be ready to defend ourselves." Sonda's eyes flicked around at the fires in the ravine. "You're safer traveling with us than you'd be on your own. At least the ones at the gathering know who we are. You're coming as guests, if that's what you want." Jon bowed his head. "We do. Thank you." Tyrion couldn't help but notice how gracefully Jon navigated these delicate interactions. The boy who had once stood on the ramparts of the wall, uncertain and alone, had grown into a man who understood leadership. He still harbored that same earnestness, yet behind it lay a profound sense of duty and empathy. Tyrion admired him for it. Perhaps, in another life, Jon would have been a king people could follow without question. But life had a twisted sense of humor. Night settled in, and the wind's howling seemed to fade as the ravine provided some barrier. Tyrion eventually managed to borrow a bit of the free folks' liquor, swallowing a mouthful that felt like molten fire down his throat. Warmth blossomed in his chest. He bedded down near the largest fire, curled in furs and cloaks, and watched as faint stars blinked overhead in a narrow slit of sky. His last thought before sleep claimed him was that forging peace might well be simpler than merely surviving the night in this icy wilderness. Morning arrived pale and unforgiving, a steely sun glimmering weakly through a high layer of cloud. The riders set out again, now with Sonda and her companions leading the way. They abandoned the ravine, climbing back onto the rolling white plains beyond the wall. The cold bit at Tyrion's ears and nose, but the idea of a real conversation with the free folks' leadership kept him moving with determination. Jon took the lead beside Sonda, and Tyrion rode alongside them at times, making easy conversation. Other times he dropped back to speak with the Night's Watch, or even to trade a word with more of the free folk in the rear guard. Around midday, they stopped for a brief rest. Tyrion dismounted stiffly, his legs protesting at the cold. A few of the younger wildlings raced through the snow, rummaging for edible roots or winter berries. One managed to find an old cache of dried moss that might serve as kindling. Ghost prowled around the perimeter, occasionally bounding through the snowdrifts, returning with faint traces of some creature's scent. Tyrion watched the direwolf, reflecting on how Ghost's wildness made him akin to these people beyond the wall, unbound by southern norms, fierce yet strangely loyal. When they continued, the terrain shifted. Low hills gave way to broader valleys. The wind died down some, leaving a heavy stillness. That quiet unsettled Tyrion. It reminded him of the hush before a storm. Once, he would have made a witty remark to lighten the mood, but something in him decided against it. The hush felt sacred, as though they were traveling through a land older than the petty quarrels of men. By the time they found the watchtower that evening, the sky was streaked with pink and gold. Tyrion squinted against the reflected brightness off the snow. The tower was a crumbling edifice of ancient stone perched on a rocky rise near a lake that lay frozen, its surface shimmering in the last light of day. There were shapes moving around the tower and across the lake, shapes that formed a loose gathering. dozens of wildlings, maybe more. Smoke rose from multiple fires, giving the site a feeling of organized encampment rather than chaos. Despite that, tension coiled inside Tyrion. Here they were, a small band of Night's Watch and Southern envoys, riding straight into the heart of Freefolk territory. Sonda lifted her spear as a signal and a horn sounded from near the tower. Figures emerged from the half-ruined gates, and soon a small delegation of wildlings approached on foot. At their head walked a tall man with long, braided hair dyed a streak of deep red. Tyrion guessed it might be some form of berry or root used as dye. He carried a massive axe strapped across his back. Behind him, others followed, some carrying weapons openly. But there was no immediate threat in their posture. They looked more curious, cautious. Jon dismounted first, leading his horse by the reins. Tyrion followed suit, stepping onto the packed snow. Ghost padded forward alongside Jon, ears erect. The tall man with the braided red hair halted a few paces away. For a moment, the two groups simply regarded each other. Jon spoke quietly. "My name is Jon Snow. I've come with a company of the Watch and an envoy from the south. We're here in peace." The tall man studied Jon's face. Then his gaze slid to Tyrion. "I remember you," he said in a raspy voice laced with the accent of the free folk. "You're the crow who fought the others with us. You had a giant's heart," some said. Jon swallowed, a flicker of humility crossing his features. "Many fought. Most braver than I. But I fought, yes." The man inclined his head. "I'm Haver the Red if you need a name. We've heard talk that you might come. Or someone would. They say you want to speak about a true peace." Tyrion managed a polite bow, though his knees felt stiff in the cold. "We'd like nothing more. We came all this way to discuss it." A low murmur ran through the wildlings assembled behind Haver. He seemed to weigh them with a glance before stepping aside. "Then we'd best get you warmed. We meet in the shadow of the watchtower each evening. There are many chieftains here, men and women. They'll want to hear you. We've lost too many to keep fighting each other." At that, Jon nodded. "Thank you." The group was led past the tower's crumbling outer walls into what might once have been a courtyard. Fires crackled amid fallen stones. Lean-tos and makeshift shelters lined the base of the tower. People of all ages gathered around these fires, cooking what meager rations they had or patching worn clothes. Some stared openly at Tyrion and the Watch. Others pointed in recognition. Tyrion caught sight of a child with a ragged stuffed toy clutched tightly in her arms, peering up at the newcomers with wide eyes. They were directed to an area near a large bonfire where the ground had been cleared. Tyrion's gaze roamed across the frozen lake, just beyond the wall, its surface reflecting the blood-red hues of dusk. It truly was a haunting sight, beautiful in its darkness. Over the next hour, as night fell, more free folk arrived from different corners of the encampment. Some recognized Jon, acknowledging him with grudging respect. A few recognized Tyrion and approached him curiously, questioning him about the battles in the south or the shape of the Iron Throne. Their candor amused him, no courtesy titles, no stiff formalities. The free folk were straightforward, if nothing else. And Tyrion found that refreshing. Eventually, a circle formed around the main bonfire, and the chieftains, leaders of various clans, gathered. Sonda was among them, along with Haver the Red and perhaps a dozen others. Jon and Tyrion were invited to stand in the middle of that circle, the heat of the flames washing over them. Ghost stood just to Jon's left, drawing respectful glances from the gathered free folk. The men and women of the Night's Watch formed a protective ring behind Tyrion and Jon, though they kept their hands away from their weapons, aware that any sign of aggression could sour the mood. Silence settled over the crowd. The fire crackled, sending sparks fluttering into the twilight. Tyrion felt the weight of many gazes upon him. Jon took a step forward, meeting the eyes of the chieftain steadily. "I'm not here as a crow," Jon said, voice carrying over the hush. "I'm not here as a king or a lord. I'm here as someone who remembers how we fought side by side when the dead came. That victory was ours, all of us. Wildling or crow, north or south, it didn't matter. We survived. But now that the war is over, I see the old divisions creeping back. We want to stop that from happening." A chieftain with a scar over her left eye spoke. "Up. And how do you plan to stop it? The Watch has guarded the wall for thousands of years, keeping us out, labeling us as enemies. Why should we believe anything has changed?" Jon's gaze flicked to Tyrion, who took his cue to speak. Lifting his voice, Tyrion addressed the circle. "My name is Tyrion Lannister. I've come from King's Landing, where once I served as Hand of the Queen. Now, in what remains of our realm, I serve whoever wishes to keep the peace. I understand your doubts. The free folk have shed much blood at the hands of Southern lords. And Southern lords have also been told tales that paint you as savages and raiders. But many from the South have never met you. They've never spoken to you as equals. They know only stories. A man with a heavy brow spat into the snow. Those stories led your men to kill us by the hundreds. Tyrion nodded gravely. Yes, they did. And I can't undo what's been done. But I can try to ensure a future where such slaughter doesn't happen again. My hope is to bring word back south that you are not our enemies, not if we share this land with mutual respect. A ripple of conversation flitted around the circle. Some wore guarded expressions, others seemed intrigued. Jon stepped forward again. When I was a brother of the Watch, truly a brother in oath, I learned that the free folk aren't all that different from us. Families, clans, men, women, children, they simply want to live. You fought with us at the Battle of Winterfell, at the War for the Dawn, because you recognized a common threat. I'm asking you to recognize that threat still exists, maybe not the dead, but the threat of darkness in men's hearts. We can be free of it if we stand together. The scarred woman regarded Jon. And if we say no? If we say we're done dealing with southern lords and we'll keep to ourselves beyond the wall, will the Watch harry us again? Jon shook his head firmly. No. I've done all I can to ensure that doesn't happen. The Watch's purpose is to guard the realms of men from supernatural threats, not to wage war on the free folk. If there are wrongs committed by my men, I will hold them accountable. That is my oath to you. Someone else chimed in, a younger wildling man with a narrow face. Words are easy. What do we gain by trusting you, aside from not being hunted? Tyrion stepped in. Trade for one. If the free folk need steel for weapons, or tools, or medicines that can't be found in the far north, we could arrange it. In return, the south might benefit from furs, game, or knowledge of these lands. Perhaps we can establish outposts or ways that our peoples might cross the wall freely and fairly. The days of the closed border could end. Murmurs again. Tyrion sensed some cautious interest. One older woman with white hair braided in thick coils frowned thoughtfully. And who enforces these agreements? If a lord in the south decides to break them, who stops him? Jon glanced at Tyrion. They discussed the scenario. Tyrion cleared his throat. The throne in King's Landing, for better or worse, has recognized the Night's Watch as a neutral protector. If this arrangement is recognized by the current monarch, whichever form that monarchy takes, then I'm prepared to argue for the establishment of a recognized free territory beyond the wall. No southern lord or soldier will have the right to claim these lands. And if any do, they'd be violating the crown's decree. However, the Red exchanged a look with Sonda, who gave a subtle nod. Not all free folk want contact with the South, Haver said. Some blame you for years of bloodshed. Others just don't see the point. There's plenty of space for us up here. Why not just leave us be? Jon spread his hands. We can do that. We won't force anyone into this agreement. But for those who wish to keep lines of communication open, who might find value in trade or safe passage, we want to make it official. Another voice called from the back of the crowd, and if you all come north to settle? We don't want your lords building castles on our land. Tyrion turned toward the voice. We're not here to claim your lands. We're here to ensure that the border is not a place of blood and death. If any want to cross in either direction, let it be done with civility. No more raids. No more hunts. After this exchange, a low hum of debate spread among the chieftains. They spoke to each other in hushed voices, perhaps each representing different clans or families. Tyrion felt a pang of nerves. He knew winning them over wouldn't be as simple as one speech around a fire. But at least the conversation was happening. They'd come this far without bloodshed. The hush broke when Sonda rose to her feet. We can't decide this in one night, that's certain. But I've spoken to Tyrion Lannister. I've fought beside Jon Snow. If there's a chance for peace, I'm inclined to see it through. Let's hear them out in full. She turned to Jon and Tyrion. We'll meet again tomorrow, each clan deciding where it stands. If you'd speak more with us, we'll be here. We've prepared a shelter for you and your men by the tower's old wall. That's our hospitality for now. Jon offered a small bow. Thank you. We're grateful. One by one, the chieftains began to disperse, some staying to talk further with each other, others returning to smaller fires. The tension lingered, but Tyrion felt the faint flicker of hope. They hadn't rejected the idea outright. That alone was a victory in these parts. As the hour grew late, Tyrion and Jon settled into the makeshift shelter allotted to them. It was a space beneath a half-intact archway where someone had put up rough wooden walls against the wind. The men of the Night's Watch took shifts on guard, though it seemed unlikely the free folk would attack. Tyrion lit a small lantern. Jon, already half-wrapped in a cloak, leaned against a stone, eyes distant. So, Tyrion said softly, "We're still alive. That's progress." Jon gave a weary smile. "Yes, and they didn't run us off. That's a start. But there are many clans here, many strong personalities. Some have lost brothers or sisters to the Watch. Some might want revenge." Tyrion nodded. I can't say I blame them for their anger, but we can't undo the past. We can only try to build a better future. Jon exhaled, swirling the cold air. I'll speak to them. Answer their questions. The free folk respect honesty and strength. If I can show them the sincerity of our intentions, maybe they'll see that we truly want peace. Tyrion's thoughts drifted to King's Landing. How he wished he had more ironclad authority. The realm had been fractured by war for so long. The new regime tried to keep the peace, but lords squabbled for power. Still, Tyrion clung to the idea that forging ties with the free folk would be a triumph no one could easily oppose who would want another war with the North. He yawned, feeling the day's exhaustion weighing on him. Get some rest, Jon said, voice quiet. We'll need our strength for tomorrow. And so Tyrion curled himself into his furs. Despite the cold seeping through the cracks in the makeshift walls, a bone-deep tiredness overcame him. The sounds of distant chatter, the faint crackle of fires, and the snuffling of horses lulled him into a fitful sleep. He dreamt of an endless plain of snow. Shadows flickered at the edges of vision, men, beasts, half-remembered shapes from nightmares. In the dream, the voices of the free folk mingled with the calls of crows overhead, cawing in a language he couldn't understand. He saw the Iron Throne stranded in a vast field of ice as though waiting for no one. When he tried to climb it, the throne splintered and shards of ice fell away, revealing only darkness underneath. He woke shivering, uncertain of the hour, but the darkness was still complete. He lay awake for a time, listening to the wind, thinking about the precarious nature of power. Then he drifted back to sleep, eventually roused by the first gray light of dawn. Day broke, and the camp around the watchtower stirred to life. Tyrion shared a simple meal of hard bread and dried meat with the men of the watch. Jon was quiet, his mind already on the negotiations to come. Outside, free folk were already gathering around fires, sharpening weapons, chatting in low tones. Many gave curious looks to the black-clad crows who moved among them, though no open hostilities broke out. By mid-morning, the bonfire circle had reformed. The chieftains returned. This time, there were more of them, new faces who had arrived in the night. They eyed Tyrion and Jon with varying degrees of skepticism. Some started asking direct questions. How exactly would trade routes be established? Who would control the gates in the wall? What if a wildling was wronged in the south? How would justice be served? Tyrion and Jon did their best to answer. Tyrion explained that any crossing points in the wall would be supervised by the Watch and volunteers from the Free Folk, ensuring fair passage. He spoke of a written treaty that he hoped to present to the crown, naming a free territory of the north not subject to southern lords. He mentioned possible systems for lodging grievances. Jon answered from the perspective of the Watch, insisting that the men in black would serve as impartial protectors, not aggressors. Some chieftains nodded along, others scoffed. The discussion stretched into hours, with arguments breaking out among the free folk themselves. Many had differing opinions on whether forging closer ties with the South was wise. A few demanded more concrete guarantees. We've heard these promises before, said a thick-set man with multiple scars on his arms. I remember when the Night's Watch parleyed with Mance Rayder. They spoke of peace then too, but the crows turned on us. Jon stiffened, pain flickering across his features at the memory of Mance's fate. I was there, Jon replied softly. Mance wanted peace, but the powers in the south rejected him. They saw him as a threat. That was a mistake, and countless died because of it. I can't promise it won't happen again, but I will fight to make sure it doesn't. This time, you have more than just the king beyond the wall asking for peace. You have me, Tyrion, and the memory of the war against the dead. And you have a realm more tired of bloodshed than ever before. More debate ensued. It felt like an assembly, albeit an informal one. The free folk had no unified government, each clan or tribe had its own practices. But they did have certain elders and leaders whose voices held weight. If they could agree on a general stance, the rest might follow. Tyrion felt a headache coming on from the rapid volley of questions, the swirl of potential pitfalls. But he kept his composure, using every ounce of his diplomatic skill. He acknowledged fears, shared regrets, and tried to show genuine respect. Gradually, as the sun arced across the sky, he sensed the atmosphere shift. People began to speak not only of their grievances, but of what a future without constant conflict might look like. You want to bring healers from the south? Asked one wildling woman with a battered wooden staff. Our children sicken every winter, and many die. If we had some remedies or knowledge we lack, that alone might be worth the risk. We could teach your healers as well, Tyrion replied, seizing on the point. Information goes both ways. I've heard free folk have herbs that cure frostbite and fevers better than many of our southern potions. We could learn from each other. A man with tattoos covering his face grunted his approval. That's something real we can use. Others chimed in about the possibility of sharing resources. Wood for steel, game for grain, knowledge of forging from blacksmiths in the south. The conversation began to tilt towards a cautious optimism, though always overshadowed by suspicion. Still, Tyrion felt that small seed of hope growing. Maybe, just maybe, this was how alliances began. Towards dusk, a blustery wind swept in, bringing a dusting of fresh snow from the east. The bonfire roared, sparks flying. Chieftains huddled closer. Jon and Tyrion braced themselves against the cold. It was then that a new voice joined the circle. He stepped forward, flanked by two grim-faced warriors. A tall, gaunt man with a hide cloak and a necklace made of raven skulls. Lines etched his face, telling of many harsh winters. He glowered at Jon and Tyrion with an intensity that sets him on edge. Sanda stiffened upon seeing him. "You speak of peace, you speak of unity," the man said in a deep voice that resonated through the camp. "But where was the South when my kin starved? Where was the South when the crows poured arrows upon our hunting parties? You think we should bow again? We did that once for a chance to hide behind your wall when the dead came. Maybe that was a mistake." A hush fell. Jon met the man's gaze evenly. "We're not asking you to bow. We're asking for cooperation. No one here wants you to kneel. That's the difference." The man snorted. "Cooperation is just another form of bending the knee if you have to follow Southern rules. We're free folk." His eyes swept the circle. "I say we need no more entanglements with crows or kings. Let them keep their side of the wall, we'll keep ours. Any crow that crosses into our land without leave," he drew a finger across his throat in a crude gesture. Tyrion swallowed the knot of nerves. This was the opposition they had feared. "Might I ask your name?" he said, trying to maintain courtesy. "Varl," the man growled. "Chieftain of the Frost River clan. We lost half our people to the winter and the wars. I won't lose more to broken promises." Jon's voice was quiet. "Varl, if you truly believe we're here to subdue you, you can see with your own eyes that we don't have the strength for that. We come only to talk." Varl's mouth curled in a sneer. "That's how it begins. Talk. Then come the laws, the taxes, the punishments for those who don't obey. Next thing we know, we're no freer than the poor souls in the South who bend the knee to a king they never chose." He spit on the ground, glaring around. "We endured thousands of years without a Southern alliance. We'll endure thousands more. Any who follow these crows are fools." With that, he turned on his heel, stalking away from the fire. His two warriors flanked him, scowls etched on their faces. A ripple of uneasy conversation broke out. Tyrion exhaled slowly. Perhaps that was inevitable. The free folk were not a monolith. Some were bound to reject this idea of partnership. Sanda rose, letting silence settle. "Varl has lost much," she said softly. "No doubt many others feel the same. But not all. We've heard your words, Jon Snow, Tyrion Lannister. I, for one, believe there's sense in them. And I know I'm not alone." Several chieftains murmured in agreement. Haver the Red stepped forward, arms folded. "We'll take a vote among ourselves tonight. Whoever wants peace with the South can speak up. Whoever wants to remain separate, well, no one will force them to do otherwise. We're free folk. We choose for ourselves." Tyrion felt relief mingled with apprehension. A vote. It had a kind of rough justice to it. But they would soon see just how many clans favored forging these ties and how many walked away. He bowed his head, acknowledging Haver. "Thank you for your fairness." The circle broke up again, smaller clusters forming around lesser fires. Tyrion watched as groups of wildlings debated animatedly, voices rising and falling. Jon withdrew to speak with some older chieftains who had fought at his side in the past. Tyrion used the moment to move through the camp, talking to individuals, answering questions, reassuring them that no one wanted to chain the free folk. He repeated the words freedom and respect often, knowing these were key to winning hearts and minds. Time dragged on, the camp lit by torchlight and the glow of fires as the stars emerged overhead. Tyrion's lips were chapped, his feet half frozen, but he kept going. This was diplomacy at its most raw, no gilded halls, no scribes or heralds. Just men and women huddled against the cold, trying to decide if trust was worth the risk. At length, he found Sanda near a fire, conversing quietly with a handful of her clan. She motioned for him to join them. He crouched down by the flames, grateful for the warmth. "We've spoken," Sanda said. "My people think it's worth the risk. There's more to gain than to lose, so long as we stay vigilant. That's how many see it." Tyrion nodded, smile faint. "I appreciate that. Do you think Varl might disrupt the vote or cause violence if it doesn't go his way?" Sanda's features hardened. "He might. He's got a sizable following, too. The Frost River clan has always been fierce. But I doubt he'd attack outright here in front of the other chieftains. If he walks away, so be it." The notion that free folk clans might splinter off weighed on Tyrion. A partial alliance was better than none, though. Tyrion realized that absolute unity might be impossible, and that was the nature of the free folk. They were individuals used to forging their own paths. Maybe that was acceptable as long as the majority agreed to some form of peace. Night wore on. Jon rejoined Tyrion, both men exhausted by repeated discussions. Ghost trotted ahead of them, sniffing around for scraps of food. A hush gradually descended on the watchtower grounds as people concluded their heated debates. The chieftains agreed to convene one final time before turning in. Once again, they stood by the large bonfire. Varl was absent, as were a few of his supporters. But the rest were here. They spoke briefly, each chieftain stating their stance. Haver the Red declared that the men and women of his clan would be open to a new accord with the South. Sonda said the same. The scarred woman from the earlier conversation also voiced her grudging support, noting that she'd withhold complete trust until she saw results. One by one, nearly all the clans present joined in agreement, though a few declared they would take no part, opting to remain entirely separate. So the line was drawn. Roughly 2/3 of the leaders declared, in their own words, that they would honor a peace. No formal kneeling, no subservience, just an understanding that the free folk were not enemies of the South. An agreement to open certain trade routes, to let healers and knowledge cross the wall, and to refrain from raids or retaliation. Tyrion felt a cautious triumph glowing in his chest. This was more than he dared hope for. They would need to formalize it, of course, perhaps with a few words set down on parchment. But the free folk placed more value in spoken oaths and the memory of witnesses. Jon stood in the circle, his breath misting in the cold air, face lit by firelight. On behalf of the Night's Watch, I pledge to keep the peace. We will no longer harm the free folk simply for crossing the wall. We will treat you as neighbors, not enemies. Should any threat from beyond these lands arise, we stand ready to face it together. A murmur of agreement rose, mingled with relief. Tyrion spoke next, giving his vow to bring the matter to the crown, to speak in favor of these new ties. He promised to do all in his power to ensure no southern lord could simply claim free folk lands. When he finished, there was a silence. Then Haver raised his axe in salute, and a ragged cheer went up. It was not unanimous. Some faces remained tight-lipped, some walked away, but enough voices called out their approval that hope blazed in Tyrion's heart. Amidst that tumult, the bonfire crackling sparks skyward, Tyrion felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Jon. He gave a weary but genuine smile. "We did it," Jon said softly, as though scarcely believing it. Tyrion nodded, allowing himself a rare moment of unguarded relief. One step, at least. There's still a long road ahead. But for now, victory tasted sweet. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the chorus of wildling voices wash over him. They were voices of survivors, voices of those who refused to be tamed yet were willing to stand in solidarity. If there was any place in the known world where freedom might be preserved without bloodshed, perhaps it was here, beyond the wall, forged in the crucible of ice and strife. They spent another day at the watchtower, finalizing details. Several chieftains appointed representatives who would travel with Tyrion and Jon back to the wall, possibly even to Castle Black, to witness the formalities. They'd want to see the passages in the wall and ensure the watch would truly uphold its end. Tyrion was careful to outline a plausible structure for trade. Caravans that would be permitted to pass with watchers from both sides. The free folk had little use for gold, but they valued steel, salt, fabrics, and medicines. In exchange, they offered furs, hides, rare herbs, and knowledge of the land. More than one free folk leader teased Jon, suggesting that if the Southerners wanted to buy giant bones or mammoth tusks, they could be persuaded for a fair price. Varl and his Frost River clan remained aloof. They camped on the far side of the lake. Word traveled that he planned to leave soon, taking his people deeper into the wilderness. Some said they might keep to themselves, living off the land, ignoring the new arrangement. Others feared they might continue to raid watchers at the border. Jon resolved to station extra scouts to watch for trouble, but with no intention of provoking a fight unless necessary. One of the conditions of the peace was that the free folk themselves would handle outliers who broke the truce. That was an agreement some were willing to enforce. If a clan started raiding, it would threaten the entire arrangement for everyone. When the appointed day arrived to depart, Tyrion found himself at the edge of the watchtower courtyard, double-checking his horse's saddle. The Night's Watchmen prepared to ride as well. Some of the free folk, perhaps a dozen in all, had horses of their own or shared mounts, ready to accompany them. Jon stood nearby, exchanging final words with Haver and Sonda, who would remain to oversee things here until they received word from the south. Tyrion breathed in the cold air, feeling a surge of optimism. This wasn't the completion of the journey, but it was a milestone. The lines of conflict that had defined so many generations were beginning to fade. True, old grudges would linger, and men like Varl might disrupt the peace. But a new path lay open. He caught a glimpse of the Iron Throne in his mind's eye, wondering what the current occupant would say about all this. Possibly they'd see it as a curiosity or a distraction. But Tyrion would make them listen. He'd seen too much death not to try. Jon finished his farewells and approached. Ghost loped alongside him. "Ready to go, Tyrion?" Tyrion hoisted himself into the saddle with a grunt, shifting to find a comfortable seat. "Ready as I'll ever be. If my toes don't thaw out soon, I'll have to start naming them to keep them motivated. But yes, let's head back." Jon suppressed a grin. A sense of humor is good. You'll need it when you stand in front of the lords and ladies to present our grand idea. Tyrion feigned a dramatic sigh. "Oh, believe me, I plan on being very entertaining. I might even juggle if it helps. Though I imagine I'll have to rely on more than jest if I'm to sway them." They set off from the watchtower, the free folk delegation mingling with the watch in a somewhat ragged procession. Varl and his clan, perched on a distant ridge, watched them go. Tyrion felt a chill as their silhouettes darkened against the sky, but he let the feeling pass. Not everyone would be won over. That was the price of freedom. The ride back was slow and taxing. Each night they found some shelter or hollow to camp, though the wind seemed less vicious than before. Perhaps it was only Tyrion's renewed spirits that made the cold more bearable. At one of these stops, under a midnight sky blazing with northern lights, Tyrion found himself in conversation with a free folk representative named Torrin, a man with a braided beard who had once lost a brother at Hardhome. Torrin had volunteered to speak on behalf of his clan in any further negotiations. As they sat by the fire, Torrin asked Tyrion about King's Landing, about the buildings, about the Red Keep. He seemed fascinated by the idea of stone towers so tall they dwarfed anything he had seen. "It's strange," Torrin said, eyes gleaming in the firelight, "to think of thousands of people living so close together, all behind walls of stone. How do they breathe? How do they hunt for food?" Tyrion laughed softly. "They mostly buy their food at markets. The city is near a major port, so ships bring in grain and other supplies. As for breathing, well, let's just say the air isn't always so fresh. But some of us find it comforting, having so many neighbors close by." Torrin shook his head in disbelief. "I doubt I'd like it. Too crowded. But maybe I'll see it one day. If this peace means I can travel south without a bag over my head." "It's a possibility," Tyrion said, raising a wineskin in a friendly salute. "Who knows, maybe you'll end up enjoying the bustle for a time. Even if you stay for a few days, it's an experience. I imagine the southern lords might be more unsettled by you than you by them." They shared a laugh, the sound echoing softly in the chilly night. In that moment, Tyrion felt how incredible it was to be bridging worlds once thought irreconcilable. He recalled how he once found the North oppressive and alien. Now, sitting here with Torrin, sharing a drink beneath swirling green lights in the sky, he felt the thrill of discovery all over again. Over the next few days, they pressed on. The party grew more comfortable in each other's company. The free folk told tales of their hunts, their clan histories, the spirits they believed roamed the far north. The Night's Watchmen, initially reserved, began to open up as well, telling jokes or sharing their own stories of southern origins. Tyrion watched these interactions with a quiet satisfaction. This was diplomacy in its most natural form, not on parchment, but in shared laughs around a campfire, in the willingness of men to break bread or dried meat together. When the wall finally came into sight, Tyrion found himself unexpectedly struck by its vastness again. The The sheer mass of ice rising from the snowy ground was both awe-inspiring and daunting. It reminded him of how small men truly were in the face of nature's grandeur. Their plan to open passages in that great barrier seemed almost laughable, yet it was happening. At Jon's word, the watch opened the gates for their small group. The free folk who accompanied them gazed with wary interest at the tunnel of ice and stone. Emerging on the south side, Tyrion couldn't help but feel a sense of crossing back into another world. Castle Black rose before them, dark and familiar. Watchmen moved about on the battlements, exchanging curious looks when they saw so many free folk arriving peaceably. Jon called a greeting to some men on the ramparts, and the group rode in without trouble. If one had predicted this scene a few years ago, most would have laughed them off as mad. Yet here they were. The next day, they rested at Castle Black. Jon met with the acting officers of the watch, explaining the broad strokes of the agreement. There was some resistance, especially among older rangers who'd lost friends and family to wildling raids. Yet, the authority Jon held, combined with Tyrion's presence and the free folks' calm, did much to quell outbursts. They hammered out provisional guidelines, watchers on each side of the gate, rules for cross-border disputes, and so on. It would take time, patience, and no small amount of caution to implement all these ideas. But seeds had been planted, and that was enough for now. Finally, the day came for Tyrion to bid Jon farewell and head south again, accompanied by a few free folk representatives who wished to see this plan through. They loaded up horses with supplies, and a small escort of the Night's Watch, Jon's most trusted men, came along to ensure safe passage. Tyrion and Jon stood in the courtyard of Castle Black, the chill wind rustling their cloaks. "Are you sure you won't come south yourself?" Tyrion asked gently. Your voice would carry great weight in convincing the crown. Jon lowered his head, a faint sadness in his eyes. "I'm not sure I belong there anymore. My place is here, ensuring the watch does what it's supposed to. Maybe once the peace is truly established, I'll come down for a time. But not yet." Tyrion nodded, understanding. Jon Snow had chosen his path. Or perhaps the path had chosen him. "Then I'll do my utmost to make your vision a reality. We owe it to everyone who bled and died to protect this realm." They clasped hands. Ghost was off to one side, watching them intently, ears perked. Tyrion offered the dire wolf a final smile, then turned to mount his horse. The free folk delegates looked both uneasy and excited, like travelers setting out to a distant land of legend. The gates opened and they started the long journey south. As they rode away from the shadow of the wall, Tyrion glanced back once. Jon Snow stood there, flanked by a few watchmen. He gave a small wave, more a gesture of solidarity than farewell. Tyrion returned it with a nod, then faced forward again. The path lay open, and with it 1,000 challenges and possibilities. He wondered how the lords of the realm would greet a band of free folk at their table. Probably with surprise and suspicion, but Tyrion was ready to meet it head-on. He was a Lannister, and if his family name had once been synonymous with cunning and ruthlessness, perhaps now he could make it synonymous with something else, bridging differences, forging new alliances. The days passed in a blur of snowy roads and cold skies that gradually began to warm as they traveled south. The free folk delegates reacted with awe to the changing landscape. Forests became thicker, the wind less harsh. Occasionally they passed villages. Tyrion instructed his escort to approach carefully so as not to startle the locals. They kept to themselves for the most part, camping off main roads. Yet whenever they did encounter travelers, they drew curious stares. A dwarf in fine, but worn, southern clothing, accompanied by men in black cloaks and a handful of wildlings with pelts and spears, was certainly not an everyday sight. Occasionally, Tyrion would see the tension in the free folks' posture, the readiness to defend themselves at any sign of hostility. But so far, caution prevailed. Tyrion reasoned that once they arrived at Winterfell, the presence of the Stark name would reassure some. Though the realm's leadership had changed, Sansa and Arya Stark had retreated from public life, and the North had its own complexities. Still, Winterfell was a symbol of the new era after the War for the Dawn. After a week, they reached the outskirts of Winterfell. Smoke rose from the chimneys and the walls loomed sturdy and welcoming in the crisp air. A different welcome than the Watchtower or Castle Black, this was a seat of northern power. Tyrion felt a wave of nostalgia, recalling the first time he'd visited. He could almost see Ned Stark's calm face, or the memory of a young Bran gazing at him with curiosity. So much had changed. They were greeted at the gates by a contingent of guards who recognized the sigils on the Night's Watch cloaks. Tyrion explained their mission, gave his name. One guard raised an eyebrow at the sight of wildlings, but allowed them inside. Tyrion thought that the presence of the watchmen helped quell immediate suspicion. Once inside the courtyard, they were met by a steward who guided them to stable their horses. Tyrion felt the free folk delegates' tension rise again, but he whispered reassurances. "We'll stay calm, speak politely, and request an audience with whomever is in charge. We'll show we come in peace." Though Winterfell no longer hosted a ruling Stark, its lady had gone south, or so rumor had it. There was still a Castellan overseeing the fortress. The Castellan's name was Robert Glover, a distant relation to House Glover, once sworn to the Starks. He met them in the hall, flanked by armed men. He recognized Tyrion with a mixture of surprise and caution. "Lord Tyrion," Glover said, voice careful. "What brings you to Winterfell in such company?" Tyrion spread his hands. "A mission of peace. These folk are from beyond the wall, and we've come to formalize an agreement that benefits both North and South. We wish to rest here briefly, replenish supplies, and possibly send ravens to the capital." Glover's gaze swept over the free folk. They met his eyes with frank stares, unflinching. At length, Glover nodded. "Winterfell is open to travelers who mean no harm. You'll have to excuse our wariness." Tyrion inclined his head graciously. "We've grown quite accustomed to wariness. Thank you for your hospitality." They were given rooms, though the free folk preferred to sleep in the stables or the courtyard, untrusting of stone walls. Tyrion found the old familiarity of Winterfell comforting. He recalled the times he'd sparred verbally with Lady Stark or the quiet conversations he'd had with the younger Starks. Ghosts of memory roamed these halls as surely as any specter. But the castle was not as lively as it once was. The great hall felt emptier, many of the local lords gone to their own holdings or to King's Landing for matters of state. Still, Tyrion cherished the warmth of its hearths. After the harsh nights beyond the wall, this was true luxury. He spent a few days conferring with Robert Glover, explaining the arrangement with the free folk, asking that a raven be sent to King's Landing about their arrival. Glover, to his credit, tried to stay neutral. "If this is what Lord Commander Snow believes is best, I won't stand in the way," Glover said. "But I make no promises on behalf of other northern lords. Many still hold grudges against wildlings." Tyrion sighed. "Yes, grudges are plentiful, but we need to show them there's a new way." In the courtyard, the free folk delegates made themselves as comfortable as they could. Some explored the ramparts, looking out over the countryside in amazement. A few tried the local ale. Their biggest surprise was the flush of real warmth in the castle's hot springs. One wildling joked that Winterfell was a place of southern magic, making the walls warm to the touch. After a time, word came that the message had been sent, but it could be weeks before they received a summons or a reply. Tyrion debated whether to push on south immediately, but recognized the value in letting the realm's leadership know they were coming. A small traveling party with wildlings might be met with hostility if they just showed up at the gates of King's Landing unannounced. So they waited, passing the days in a tenuous calm. Some local farmers brought in produce to sell in the castle yard. The free folk marveled at the fresh vegetables, having mostly subsisted on dried supplies during the winter. Tyrion purchased some from his own coin, sharing it with them to show goodwill. It was a minor gesture, but it warmed him to see them appreciate something as simple as a crisp radish. One evening, as a light snowfall dusted the courtyard, Tyrion stood near the steaming hot spring that fed through parts of Winterfell's foundation. The free folk delegates had retired to their resting places. The castle seemed hushed. He felt the presence of history around him, the old gods and the memory of the Starks. Jon Snow should have been here, but the man's sense of duty kept him at the wall. Tyrion found himself wishing his friend could see how far they'd come. Perhaps one day Jon would walk these halls again, not as an outcast or a reluctant lord, but as a champion who secured the peace that generations had thought impossible. Tyrion let out a breath, watching it swirl in the cold air. Tomorrow might bring new challenges. The South had its own turmoil, and not everyone would welcome wildlings with open arms. There would be arguments, possibly threats. But Tyrion had grown adept at navigating the labyrinth of political intrigue. Now, for the first time in years, he felt that the cause he championed was both just and vital. He wasn't fighting for a throne or for a personal vendetta. He was fighting for a future where the next generation, free folk and southern children alike, wouldn't inherit the same cycle of bloodshed. As he walked back toward his chambers, the snowflakes landed gently on his hair, and he reflected on the path ahead. The real test still lay before them, convincing the crown, convincing the lords, and ensuring that no faction would sabotage this fragile peace. But here, at Winterfell, with free folk resting in the courtyard peacefully, a small miracle had already taken place, and Tyrion Lannister had every intention of making that miracle endure. If it required more cunning words, more negotiations, and more nights in the biting cold, so be it. He'd seen enough death and despair to last a lifetime. This was a chance at something better. He paused at the threshold of the keep, looking over his shoulder at the dark silhouettes of the free folks' tents and the watchmen patrolling the walls. He thought of Jon Snow back at the wall, of the men and women beyond it who were trying to build new lives. He thought of the deals that might be struck in King's Landing and the potential fury of lords who still saw wildlings as monsters. Then he smiled. In a world where dragons once flew and the dead had walked, forging peace with the free folk was far from impossible. It just took willpower and perhaps a dash of that cleverness Tyrion had always prided himself on. Pulling his cloak tighter around his shoulders, Tyrion stepped inside. Outside, the snow continued to drift down, blanketing Winterfell in a quiet hush that carried within it the promise of new beginnings. And for the first time in many years, Tyrion felt the warmth of hope in his heart, as real and comforting as any fire that burned in the hearth. He whispered softly to himself, the words lost in the muffling fall of snow, "We can do this. We must." Then he closed the door against the cold and set his mind on the triumphs and trials to come. Tyrion remained in Winterfell for nearly a fortnight, waiting on a raven from King's Landing. In that stretch of days, he spent his time discussing trade routes, potential safe-conduct arrangements, and the logistics of letting free folk cross the wall without being harried. Robert Glover, as Castellan, offered him courtesy but made it clear he spoke for the Queen in the north only to a limited extent. Sansa Stark was away, traveling between vassal houses, or so Glover said, overseeing the region she now ruled. In her absence, Winterfell functioned smoothly under Glover's guidance, but the presence of wildlings caused a current of tension no matter how carefully Tyrion tried to soothe the atmosphere. He passed part of each day with the free folk, who lodged themselves mostly in the courtyard and near the stables, refusing to remain behind stone walls for longer than necessary. Several of the delegates, all of them accustomed to the harsh freedom beyond the wall, seemed uneasy in Winterfell's corridors with their torchlit gloom and labyrinth of passages. They wandered the courtyard, stared at the statue-filled crypt entrance, and marveled at the hot springs that heated the castle from beneath. A few times, Tyrion managed to coax them inside for meals around the great hearth, though many preferred to eat outdoors, mindful of open skies and less suspicious glances from the guards. At first, the people of Winterfell gave them a wide berth, some out of fear, some out of habit. Gradually, curiosity prevailed. Kitchen hands whispered about how these wild folk used no currency, only bartered. A blacksmith's apprentice confided to Tyrion that one of the wildlings had offered him a carved horn in exchange for finishing the blade of a spear. Such transactions became small points of fascination. Sometimes at dusk, the free folk gathered around a large fire pit in the courtyard and sang their own songs. The tunes were raw and haunting, full of minor chords and lamentations of winter. Their voices carried on the cold evening air, drawing cautious onlookers from the keep's windows. Tyrion found himself listening too, letting the songs wash over him, feeling in them the echo of lonely tundras and endless northern nights. When the raven finally arrived, Tyrion read the scroll with a wary eye. The word was brief. King Bran's council had been informed of Tyrion's approach, and they acknowledged his request for an audience. They did not forbid his journey south, nor did they throw open the gates with an eager welcome. Instead, they invited him to present the matter once he arrived in King's Landing, where the king's advisors would hear the full proposal. No mention was made of the free folk traveling with him, but Tyrion took the letter's neutrality as a guarded acceptance. He spent one last evening in the Great Hall with Robert Glover, ironing out how Winterfell might integrate into the arrangement if King Bran and the Southern Lords approved the treaty. The free folk cared little for which fortress oversaw them. They only wanted to know that no new swords would ride out to drive them off the moment the winds turned. Glover, cautious by nature and protective of the North's prerogatives, admitted that if Sansa Stark could be convinced of the plan's merit, Winterfell would not stand in its way. But he made no promises on her behalf. Thus, Tyrion prepared to depart Winterfell. He gathered his remaining gold, made sure the free folk delegates were mounted on the sturdiest horses the castle could spare, and recruited a few additional watchmen who volunteered to accompany them. 2 of the delegates had found the castle too stifling and departed early, deciding to wait near the last hearth or the shivering forest rather than trek into the southern heartland. In the end, only 3 free folk ambassadors would continue with Tyrion. Tyrion, the braided-beard man who had lost a brother at Har home. Lena, a slim, fox-like woman who prided herself on her skill with a bow, and Orek, a quiet, broad-shouldered fellow whose scarred hands attested to some old burn or frostbite. Tyrion liked Orek's calm presence. He spoke sparingly but always with pointed clarity. The morning they set forth from Winterfell was gray with a milky sky overhead. A light layer of frost slicked the courtyard stones. Glover came to see them off, flanked by half a dozen guards. They exchanged polite farewells, and Tyrion offered a bow, calling thanks for Winterfell's hospitality. The free folk gave short nods in farewell, uneasy beneath the watchful eyes of so many armed men, but the tension stayed beneath the surface. In another age, the notion of these two groups parting on civil terms would have seemed mad. Now it was the new normal. If all went well, it would become more normal still. They rode south along the King's Road. The land gradually opened up before them in rolling fields of white, though winter's grip was waning. Patches of brown grass emerged in places, and the sky no longer threatened blizzards at every breath of wind. The free folk delegates studied the new terrain with interest, remarking on how the trees grew taller and thicker than in the far north. Tyrion found himself playing the role of guide, explaining the significance of each small holdfast they passed. He felt a strange sense of pride in these details, reminders that the realm was more than just King's Landing or the castles of the powerful. All these villages, farmland, out-of-the-way groves, these people's lives had been shaped by centuries of fear regarding the wildlings. If an accord could be reached, perhaps they'd one day see the free folk as potential trading partners instead of raiders. When they reached the hustle and bustle of the market town at the crossroads, in a place with which Tyrion had a rather complicated history, things became more delicate. Southern folk, especially this far from the wall, were not used to seeing wildlings. Tyrion, Lena, and Orek had swapped most of their distinctive pelts for cloaks and thicker woolens borrowed at Winterfell, so they didn't stand out quite as starkly, yet their mannerisms, accents, and bold posture drew stares. As Tyrion guided them toward the stable yard, onlookers paused to gape at the group passing by. Whispers flitted through the crowd. "That's Tyrion Lannister," whispered some who recognized him by his mismatched hair, or by the rumors of a dwarf traveling with an entourage of black-cloaked men. Others simply muttered about strangers on the road, their eyes lingering uneasily on Orek's broad shoulders or Lena's long knife. Tyrion found the innkeeper, who had changed more than once since he'd first passed this way in simpler times. He negotiated for enough rooms so that at least he, the watchman, and the free folk delegates could each have a bed or pallet for the night. The watchman insisted on double occupancy, uncomfortable letting the wildlings' room entirely separate from them. Tyrion didn't love the subtle suggestion of distrust, but he understood their caution. Tension still hovered, and a single misunderstanding could spark trouble. In the common room that night, the place bustled with travelers and locals. Tyrion and Lena sat with Tyrion near the fire, sampling the stew and spiced wine. Orek lingered at the edge of the room, leaning against a wall where he could see both exits. His eyes scanned the crowd. Tyrion had to admit it was wise. He'd seen enough brawls break out in such places during his younger days. Conversation around them ebbed and flowed. Now and then, people shot uneasy glances at the strangers with the black cloaks and the northern furs. One bold fellow, a merchant's guard who'd already downed too many flagons of ale, sauntered up. He looked at Tyrion and Lena, then barked a laugh. "Far from home, aren't you? Do crows take all sorts these days?" Tyrion sipped his wine, trying not to show annoyance. He answered politely, "We're traveling under the protection of the Night's Watch. Our business is in King's Landing." The guard stared at Tyrion's face, recognized him, or at least recognized the rumor. A flash of understanding crossed his features, followed by wariness. "Lannister, eh?" he said, scratching his stubbled chin. "Heard stories about you, half of them saying you were dead, half that you were the king's hand." His eyes flicked back to the free folk. "But these lot." Lena's posture stiffened. She put down her bowl. "We are free folk, come in peace," she said, voice tight. "If it's peace you offer, we'll take it. If it's trouble you want," she didn't finish. She didn't have to. Her expression conveyed the message clearly enough. The guard raised both hands in mock surrender, though his grin held a challenge. "Just curious is all. Never seen wildlings up close." He turned to Tyrion. "You people still snatch babes from the cradle, or was that just a tale to scare children?" Tyrion opened his mouth to diffuse the situation, but Tyrion let out a low growl. "We steal from no cradle." "Who told you that tripe?" "A Septon once told me." "Heard it from someone else, I guess." "Said wildlings fed babes to dire wolves." Lena's voice grew colder. "We have no use for Southron babes. Our own children are precious enough." Tyrion forced a light laugh, stepping in. My friend, you'd be wise not to believe every story told by traveling septons with a thirst for sensational tales. You might end up embarrassing yourself. He gave the guard a dismissive wave. Now, please, we'd like to finish our meal in peace. The guard eyed them a moment longer, perhaps considering a retort, then shrugged. Suit yourself. Just don't go setting the place on fire with your savage ways. Chuckling to himself, he moved off to rejoin his companions at another table. Lena exhaled slowly. The nerve of that man. He calls us savage, but he's the one who walked up ready to start a fight. Tyrion nodded. Ignorance is a powerful fuel for fear. That's why we're trying to change things, yes? Let them see your people, not myths. Torrhen gave a single nod, though the tension in his joy remained. Then let's hope ignorance can be cured. They finished their meal in a tense quiet. Tyrion remained cautious, making sure no further provocations arose. Though he had a small retinue of watchmen, a brawl in the common room wouldn't help their cause. At least the innkeeper seemed wise enough to keep his staff away from trouble, hustling between tables, collecting coins without comment. Eventually, Tyrion retired to his room, wishing they could simply skip the rest of the journey and arrive in King's Landing by magic. But there was no choice. Step by step, town by town, they would confront these old prejudices. They set forth early the next day. The sky turned a lighter shade of pewter, and the wind carried the faint tang of thaw. The King's Road wound its way south through gently rolling terrain. Now and then they passed streams partially iced over or stands of tall pines that rustled in the breeze. The watchmen rode in formation around the free folk delegates, giving them space but also keeping them within a protective ring. Tyrion sometimes rode beside Torrhen or Orek, pointing out landmarks, describing the changes that had come to the Seven Kingdoms after the war. He was less certain than he sounded. The realm had not truly settled into a tranquil routine. There were pockets of resentment, local lords squabbling for advantage, harvests that had failed under the long winter. Nonetheless, by comparing it to the horrors of the dead marching south, the realm's current troubles seemed almost manageable. They traveled for another fortnight, making measured progress. Each night, they found lodging at an inn or, lacking that, a stable or barn in a local hamlet. The free folk quickly grew impatient with the stares and mutterings of small folk and posted guards. In private, Tyrion worried that any clash could unravel the entire expedition, so he took pains to speak calmly, pay fairly for lodgings, and emphasize that these were no ordinary travelers, they were representatives on a mission of peace. Sometimes it helped. Sometimes it did not, but at least open violence was averted. As they drew closer to the Crownlands, the roads became busier. Merchants in wagons, knights errant on their horses, peasants driving flocks of sheep or goats. The group began to attract attention whenever they stopped for provisions. Tyrion tried to keep his hood drawn, but inevitably someone recognized him or at least suspected. Whispers spread that the dwarf Lannister was traveling with wildlings. Some mocked it as a rumor, but enough seemed to believe it that each new village greeted them with caution. The watchmen grew restless, knowing that bandits or fanatics might see them as easy prey. Eventually, the tall shape of the dragon pit loomed in the far distance, a broken dome on a hill outside King's Landing. Tyrion felt a pang in his chest. Memories flooded back, the day Daenerys Targaryen first brought her dragons there, the alliances and betrayals that shaped the fate of the realm, the final cost of all the bloodshed. King's Landing itself lay beyond, sprawling along the Blackwater with its walls, towers, and gates. The closer they got, the more heavily trafficked the roads became. The watchmen snapped to attention, forming a column around Tyrion and the free folk, guiding them toward the city gates. At the sight of the city's walls repaired, though the scars of the final siege under Daenerys' Dragonfire were still visible, Torrhen exhaled in surprise. I've never seen so many roofs in one place, he muttered. It's like a pack of houses forced together. Lena looked uneasy. The smell. She wrinkled her nose. Gods, how can people live like this? Orek said nothing, but Tyrion saw him glance at the tall ramparts with a mixture of awe and suspicion. He could guess what went through the man's mind. So many men, so many potential threats. A fortress of stone and walls that might trap them if anything went wrong. They approached the Gate of the Gods, where Gold Cloaks stood watch. The city had been under the rule of King Bran for some time now, though the Gold Cloaks took orders from the Master of Laws and the Hand of the King. Tyrion removed his hood and announced himself. The guard captain, a heavy-set fellow with a close-cropped beard, looked startled but quickly bowed. Lord Tyrion Lannister, he said, trying to hide his surprise. We heard you'd be coming. Though not quite like this. Tyrion kept his tone polite. My companions are under my protection. We have an audience with the King's Council. I trust the gates will open to us. The guard captain nodded. Yes, my lord. Then he motioned for the others to raise the portcullis. A few gold cloaks eyed the wildlings with open curiosity. One or two spat or muttered something about savage folk, but the captain hushed them with a stern glare. Slowly, the gates groaned open. Tyrion led the column inside. Once through the gates, they were immersed in the chaos of King's Landing. Streets crowded with vendors, beggars, children darting in and out, stray dogs, squeaking cartwheels, the constant swirl of voices. The free folk delegates pressed closer to Tyrion and the watchmen, their eyes flashing with wariness. They were used to wide, empty vistas of snow and rock, not this press of humanity. Torrent tightened his grip on his horse's reins, scanning the throng as if expecting an ambush around every corner. Tyrion guided them down the main thoroughfare that led toward the Red Keep. King's Landing had partially rebuilt after the devastation unleashed by Daenerys Targaryen in her final act of retribution. Great swaths of once-burned buildings were now replaced by fresh timber and new stone, though blackened ruins still dotted the skyline. Workers continued to labor on scaffolds, roofing half-finished structures. Even so, enough of the city thrived to present a bustling, vibrant scene that might have seemed inconceivable during the darkest days of war. The talk on the street was of taxes, new trade routes by sea, and the slow but steady return of life to the Crownlands. Tyrion took heart from the signs of rejuvenation. If the city could rebuild from ashes, perhaps it could also learn to accept new alliances. When they reached the base of Aegon's high hill, the Red Keep towered above them. Its thick walls still bore scars from dragonfire, but the fortress was intact. A gatehouse let them enter the outer ward, where the King's Guard, in resplendent white cloaks, stepped forward to greet them. One of the men recognized Tyrion instantly. Ser Brienne of Tarth was not among them, as she had duties elsewhere, but there were other knights he knew by face or reputation. They seemed momentarily taken aback by the presence of the free folk, yet they did not bar the way. "We'll have to stable your horses and direct you to the throne room," said one of the King's Guard in a respectful tone. "You're expected." Tyrion nodded, dismounting carefully. The watchmen did the same. The free folk slid off their saddles, glancing at the Red Keep's walls and guard towers with stiff shoulders. Lena muttered something under her breath about a nest of stone. Torrent simply looked around, taking in every detail as though memorizing potential escape routes. The group was led into the keep, winding through courtyards until they arrived at the massive doors that opened into the throne room. Tyrion's memory flicked back to so many times he'd entered this space, under Joffrey's reign, under Tommen's, under Cersei's, then under Daenerys. Each time, the Iron Throne had loomed at the far end, a symbol of power that had cursed more lives than it had blessed. Now, the keep's renovations included new banners. The Stark direwolf flew beside the Targaryen dragon, though the latter was smaller, perhaps out of recognition that House Targaryen no longer truly ruled. The rightful occupant of the throne was Bran Stark, called Bran the Broken, king of the Six Kingdoms, for the North had chosen to stand apart under Queen Sansa. Still, the seat of royal authority remained here in King's Landing. The Grand Hall seemed less crowded than in the old days. Fewer courtiers milled about. Perhaps this was by Bran's design. He was known for conducting much of his governance in smaller councils. Even so, the hush that fell when Tyrion entered with wildlings in tow was noticeable. A ripple of surprise passed through the smattering of lords, ladies, and officials. The gold cloaks and the King's Guard parted to let them advance. At the far end of the hall, King Bran sat on the Iron Throne. A slender figure robed in dark colors, his face bearing that distant calm that many found unsettling. Beside him, on a raised step, stood Ser Podrick Payne, garbed in white, having been knighted and named to the King's Guard in recognition of his loyal service. Podrick's eyes widened upon seeing Tyrion. A flicker of warmth passed across his face, though he maintained proper composure as a sworn protector of the king. Nearby, the Master of Coin and other small council members waited with measured politeness. Tyrion recognized Bronn, now Lord of Highgarden, wearing a fine doublet that only half concealed his old swagger. Bronn raised an eyebrow at the sight of Tyrion's entourage but stayed silent. Tyrion advanced, bowing deeply. The free folk did not kneel. They stood behind him, stiff and proud, uncertain what gestures of respect were expected in southern courts. No one rebuked them, though Tyrion noticed a few watchers shift uncomfortably. King Bran regarded them with inscrutable eyes. He still used a wheeled seat, though it was discreetly placed behind the Iron Throne's dais. For formal ceremonies, they often set him upon the throne itself, but the subtle presence of his chair remained in the background. "Tyrion," the king said, voice quiet yet carrying through the hall. "It's been too long." Tyrion straightened from his bow. His chest tightened at the sight of Bran, the boy who had once been pushed from a tower window by Jaime, now grown into a man with powers and knowledge beyond any mortal's understanding, the seer of the realm, chosen to lead. "Your Grace," Tyrion replied. "I come as I promised I would. With me are delegates of the free folk, Torrhen, Lena, and Orek, chosen chieftains who speak for many beyond the wall. We beg leave to present our petition." A hush followed. Bran's gaze slid over the wildlings, resting on each in turn. The quiet intensity in his stare unnerved those who did not know him. The free folk braced themselves, hands at their sides, refusing to quail before a southern king. Lena in particular lifted her chin as though to assay. RT that she bowed to no one. Torrhen and Orek were less demonstrative, but neither moved to show obeisance. Tyrion worried that some lords might see this as disrespect, but no immediate outcry arose. Finally, Bran nodded. "Speak, Tyrion." Tyrion took a breath, launching into a clear, measured explanation of the expedition, how Jon Snow had sought to build diplomatic ties with the free folk, how they had forged a provisional agreement beyond the wall, and how a number of chieftains had signed onto peace. He spoke of the potential for trade, the need for official recognition, the desire to end centuries of bloodshed between the Watch and the wildlings. He was careful to keep his tone factual rather than impassioned, but he made it plain that he believed strongly in the importance of this cause. While he spoke, he observed the faces of the courtiers. Some listened intently, others were guarded, and a few clearly thought this was madness. When Tyrion finished, a small stir of whispers moved through the hall. One man, clad in the black and gold attire of House Rosby, stepped forward to ask, "If these free folk come south, will they claim our farmland? Will they take up arms if the harvest fails in the north?" Before Tyrion could answer, Lena surprised him by speaking directly. "We don't want your farmland. We have our own ways. But we've had to fight for every scrap we have because you crows once turned us back at the wall. We mean no harm if you don't threaten us." Her voice rang clear, echoing across the hall. "We came because we're told this new king is just. We want to see if that's true." A ripple of shock went through the onlookers. There were murmurs at her direct address to the king, without titles or courtesy. Tyrion held his breath. Bran, however, did not seem ruffled. He gazed at Lena with that same distant calm. "I hope to be just," he said. "I have seen what happens when injustice festers." A man in a long cloak of dark blue, Lord Royce of the Vale, Tyrion recalled, lifted his chin. "Fine words. But we must consider the realm's security. For centuries, the wall served as a barrier. If we declare the free folk our allies, we open the door for more savage raids if they do not all abide by this peace." Torrhen's voice rumbled, his anger barely contained. "We have clans who fought alongside you in the Great War, men who lost their lives saving your precious realms. We are not the monsters you think." Bronn scratched at his goatee, stepping forward from his position near the council. "Fought together or not, the question is, how do we keep peace if some of the free folk aren't so friendly? You said yourself, Tyrion, that not all will sign up for your treaty. So what happens when those who want no part of this drift south and start raiding?" Tyrion glanced at the delegates, recalling the vow they had made at the Watchtower. Those who agreed to the peace would police their own. "They have pledged to handle any clan that violates the truce," he answered. "If raids occur, the free folk themselves will address the culprits. And the Night's Watch, properly reformed, can assist in repelling any genuine threat without punishing the innocent." A hush fell. The king's eyes flicked toward an older man standing at the side. Tyrion recognized him as the new master of laws, an unassuming but sharp-minded lord from the Stormlands named Lord Buckler. At a gesture from Bran, Lord Buckler spoke. "Even so, we must codify the terms. There must be boundaries where these free folk can cross, how trade is to be regulated, what punishments exist for offenders. In short, we need a formal agreement. This is a matter for the small council, to be discussed and drafted." Tyrion bowed his head. "That is all we ask, my lord. A chance to draft an accord that acknowledges the free folk as neighbors, not enemies. Something we can carry north to show the clans, and something your lords can trust." Bran let the silence stretch for a moment. Then he looked out over the hall. "I remember what it was like to journey beyond the wall," he said quietly. "I saw the free folk. I saw their families and their hardships. If we close our hearts to them, we repeat the same mistakes that nearly ended us all. We must try to build a lasting peace." No one dared contradict the king directly. A few parted their lips, but the hush carried too much weight. Bran's words were mild, yet the note of finality in them was unmistakable. He nodded to Tyrion. You will bring these delegates before the council tomorrow. We will begin drafting the treaty. My hope is that this can be a step forward for everyone." Tyrion felt a flood of relief. "Thank you, Your Grace." With that, Bran signaled for the formal audience to end. A herald announced the close of court, and the onlookers began to file out. Tyrion turned to the free folk, guiding them to one side, where Ser Podrick Payne and a few other functionaries waited. Podrick approached and gave Tyrion a warm smile, which Tyrion returned. Orek, Lena, and Torrhen looked uncertain, but they relaxed somewhat upon seeing that no one rushed to seize them. Podrick directed them to living quarters in the keep. Simple chambers, nothing luxurious, but enough to rest in privacy. Tyrion insisted that the free folk be housed near him. He'd grown protective of them, understanding how vulnerable they might feel in a sprawling castle teeming with knights and guards. The watchmen who had escorted them remained in the city's barracks, ready to be called for assistance if needed. That night, Tyrion found himself in a small sitting room he had once used as Hand of the Queen, gazing out the window at King's Landing by torchlight. The city spread across the horizon, a patchwork of lights and shadows. Down by the Blackwater, ships gently swayed in the harbor. The faint tang of the sea drifted on the breeze. Tyrion sipped a cup of wine, letting memories swirl through his mind of battles and coronations, betrayals and unexpected acts of kindness. He had never quite imagined that, after everything, he would be here again under the reign of Bran Stark, championing the cause of wildlings. Perhaps the world truly could change. He heard a tentative knock at the door. "Enter," he called. Lena slipped inside, eyes flicking around the room. She still wore the borrowed cloak from Winterfell, though she'd undone the top clasp so it hung loose. She stepped forward, posture taut as a bowstring. "I can't sleep," she said plainly. "Too many walls. Too many shadows and corners. Your city is so large." Tyrion nodded, gesturing for her to sit if she wished. "It overwhelmed me too, once, and I had lived in Lannisport, which I thought was sizable. But King's Landing dwarfed it." She wandered to the window, peering out. "Torrhen and Orek are in the next chamber. They're uneasy, but they trust you. We're just not used to being surrounded by stone. If there's a threat, you can't see it coming like you can on an open plain. People talk in hushed voices behind these walls." Tyrion understood. "I appreciate your trust. I'd not betray it. These negotiations might take weeks, so we need to adapt. Tomorrow, you'll meet with the small council and they'll want more details. They might press you on whether you can truly speak for all clans." She turned, folding her arms. "We can't speak for them all, no. Varl will never accept any peace. Others like him either. But we speak for the majority who'd rather not lose any more blood. The others, they can live out their days in the wastes or come around eventually if they see this works." Tyrion nodded. "That may be enough. We're not after absolute unification, just recognition. Once this is formalized, no southern lord can claim ignorance if a free folk clan settles near the Gift or crosses south in search of trade. If we establish designated crossing points, the watchmen can keep order. A system of bartering might take shape and so on." Lena chewed her lip. "I hope it works. If it doesn't, we might have made a fatal mistake by coming here." "It will work," Tyrion said softly, though inside he knew the path would be rocky. "We'll make sure it does." He refilled his cup, offered her some wine. She eyed it, hesitating, then took a small sip. The tension across her shoulders eased a fraction. They spoke a bit longer about the day's events, about the differences she saw in the realm, fields enclosed by fences, roads that never ended, towns with more people than entire clans. Finally, she returned to her chamber and Tyrion retired with his thoughts to bed, hoping that the negotiations ahead would not crumble under the weight of old grudges. The next morning, the small council convened in a private solar to which Tyrion brought Lena, Torrhen, and Orek. They entered to find Bran already there, seated near the head of a long table. Bronn, Lord of Highgarden, sprawled in a cushioned chair with his boots resting on another seat until a sharp glance from the Master of Laws made him remove them. The Master of Coin, a slender man with a pointed beard from House Redwine, rifled through papers. Lord Buckler, the Master of Laws, was quietly conferring with a steward, while Grand Maester Samwell Tarly fussed with the chain around his neck. His broad face creased in polite curiosity at the sight of the free folk. Tyrion guided his companions forward. Bran inclined his head in welcome and gestured for them to sit. The free folk did, albeit with visible caution, examining each new face. Samwell offered a small smile. Torrin gazed back with measured reserve, but Orek seemed to sense Sam's earnestness and gave a brief nod. Lord Buckler began, clearing his throat. We're here to set down the terms of a possible accord between the Crown and these representatives of the free folk. First, we must clarify. Do you hold leadership over all free folk beyond the wall, or only certain clans? Lena spoke up, surprisingly firm. We speak for the majority. There is no single king beyond the wall. Mance Rayder once united us for a time, but that was an exception. Now each clan chooses for itself. Still, many have agreed to a peace. The rest may join or stay separate. Buckler scribbled notes. Fair enough. Next, do you seek free movement south of the wall at any time, or only under certain conditions? Torrin said, we want the freedom to come south for trade, or if hunting is scarce. Some might even settle. That's for each clan or family to decide. But we do not wish to break your laws or invite your armies to chase us. Samwell Tarly interjected gently. What about crimes committed on either side? If a free folk clan trespasses on a southern lord's lands, or if someone from the south attacks free folk crossing peacefully, how do we resolve it? Orek rumbled. We'd handle that ourselves. Punish those who break the peace. But we don't want southern lords sending their knights to slaughter entire camps. We've seen that happen too many times. That's what we want to end. Bronn cocked his head. So you want to guarantee that if one free folk man steals a horse, we don't go full swords out? It's a tall order. Lords don't like their property stolen. Tyrion spoke up, choosing his words carefully. Hence the need for a joint enforcement mechanism. If a free folk man breaks the peace by raiding, the clan leaders who've signed on must help deliver him to justice, or punish him themselves. Conversely, if a southern lord or his men harm a free folk camp without due cause, they'll answer to the crown. We create a system of accountability so it doesn't spiral into all-out violence. Bran listened, eyes distant, as though reading the shape of possibilities. We'll have to formalize this in writing, he said at last. But beyond that, we need to consider the practical question of resources. Will the crown support the free folk with grain if their winter stores fail? Or is this purely a non-aggression pact? Tyrion thought of the harsh conditions beyond the wall. It might be wise to allow some measure of trade in staples, grain, salt, flour. In exchange, the free folk have items of value to the south, furs, unique herbs, walrus ivory, and so on. This could become a beneficial exchange. Perhaps designate Eastwatch by the Sea and Castle Black as official trade points. Lord Buckler wrote furiously. Bronn watched with vague disinterest as if bored by the details. Samwell Tarly, however, looked quietly enthusiastic. Such an arrangement could greatly expand the realm's knowledge, Sam offered. Imagine the shared lore. The free folk have traditions that might help us with winter diseases and cold weather survival. We have maesters who can teach new methods of farming. Both sides would gain. Lena regarded Sam with a more approving look now, seeing that he was genuinely curious and not hostile. Orek remained reserved, though Tyrion noticed he occasionally nodded in agreement with what Sam said. Torrin, for his part, listened carefully. Buckler pursed his lips. We must also be mindful of the north. Lady Sansa Stark has not yet weighed in. Winterfell has historically overseen the gift near the wall. Their cooperation is essential. Bran answered softly, my sister values peace. I believe she'll see reason, especially if it ensures no further conflict along the wall. But we will need to consult her. Still, as king of the Six Kingdoms, I can declare that these lands beyond the wall belong to no southern lord. No one can claim them by right of conquest anymore. That statement, though delivered calmly, carried enormous weight. It was a formal recognition that the crown relinquished any claim to the territory beyond the wall, which was an extraordinary shift. Tyrion knew it would cause a stir among certain houses who still nursed dreams of subjugation or expansions. But if the king declared it so, they would have to abide. Hour by hour, the discussion ranged over more details: what routes the free folk could take, how disputes would be arbitrated, how to handle fostering or apprenticeships if free folk youth wished to learn southern crafts. Some suggestions were left for future debate, but the backbone of a treaty took shape. The free folk delegates, though unaccustomed to formal negotiations, proved direct and sensible. They wanted to preserve their autonomy while ensuring they wouldn't be slaughtered the next time they ventured south. The small council, for its part, recognized that bridging old animosities was better than risking another violent confrontation down the line. With each point, Tyrion felt a cautious optimism building. The session ended near dusk with the understanding they would reconvene the following day. Stewards appeared to offer food and wine, allowing everyone a moment to breathe. Bronn ambled over to Tyrion, smirking. "Didn't think I'd see the day you'd return to King's Landing with a pack of wildlings in tow." Tyrion shrugged. "Stranger things have happened." Bronn gave a short laugh. "Aye, we've seen them, haven't we? Suppose if this leads to more trade, it's good for business. Maybe I'll get me some fancy furs from up north. Highgarden can always use new markets." He clapped Tyrion on the shoulder, then wandered off, likely in search of better entertainment. Sam approached next, bowing slightly to the free folk delegates. "I hope these talks aren't too overwhelming. If you need anything, books or papers, let me know. My duty is to ensure knowledge is shared." Torrin eyed him curiously. "You're the Grand Maester? I never thought to see a maester so different." Sam chuckled, adjusting his chain. "I've been told I don't quite fit the mold, but I'll do my best to help. Knowledge is the key to bridging gaps, I believe. If we understand one another, we're less likely to fear each other." Lena considered him, then extended a hand in an oddly formal gesture she must have picked up from Tyrion or from observing southern courtiers. Sam shook it. She gave a smile, small but sincere. "We could use someone who sees us as more than savages." That left Tyrion with a glow of satisfaction. If the free folk could appreciate Sam's earnest goodwill, it boded well. He saw King Bran speaking quietly with Lord Buckler at the far end of the room, likely about legal ramifications. There was no telling how many lords would protest once they learned of these terms, but for now, the momentum was with them. The next several days followed a similar pattern. The delegates met with the small council, hammered out language for the treaty, and found common ground in unexpected places. The city's rumor mill churned. People gossiped about the wildling ambassadors in the Red Keep. Some were intrigued, while others were scornful or frightened. A few times outside the castle walls, passers-by hurled insults at them or spat on the ground. The watchmen who had come from Castle Black formed a protective circle whenever they ventured out. Tyrion made certain no one ventured alone. It felt strange being walled up in the keep for safety, but there was no choice. In the evenings, Tyrion often found himself in that same sitting room, either with the free folk or with Samwell, reviewing documents. Bronn sometimes dropped by to crack jokes or complain about the dryness of negotiations. Podrick Payne visited once, shyly greeting Tyrion and asking if he remembered all the times they'd traveled together. Tyrion grinned, recalling those old days when Pod had been a stammering squire. Now he was a knight of the King's Guard, carrying himself with a quiet confidence. They drank a cup of wine together, reminiscing about Brienne of Tartha's unwavering sense of honor and the countless narrow escapes in war. At last, after nearly a week, a final draft of the Accord of the Wall was prepared. A parchment detailing the recognition of free folk autonomy beyond the wall, the right to cross under specified conditions, the establishment of neutral trade posts at Castle Black and Eastwatch, and the mutual defense against any who would shatter the peace. Bran planned to affix the royal seal, pending only the North's acceptance. Copy would be sent to Sansa Stark. Another would go to the Lords Paramount of the remaining 6 kingdoms, to ensure they understood the Crown's stance. When the time came for a more ceremonial gathering, signatories and witnesses in the throne room, Tyrion felt the usual flutter of nerves. He stood with the free folk delegates before the dais, behind a table where the parchment waited. King Bran observed from the Iron Throne, along with the small council. A small crowd of courtiers and onlookers had assembled. The hush was marked by curiosity and no small measure of apprehension. There had never been an accord quite like this in the realm's history. Lord Buckler, clearing his throat, recited the main points of the treaty. Then, one by one, the signatories were to step forward. Bran affixed the royal seal, pressing it into hot wax with a calm finality. Samwell Tarly, as Grand Maester, signed as well, signifying the official record. Lord Buckler's signature represented the legal authority of the Crown's laws. Tyrion, not officially an officer of the Crown now but recognized as a key architect of the accord, signed in a separate place labeled Witness and Envoy. The free folk delegates shifted uncertainly at the table, exchanging glances. Lena took up the quill first. She had learned to write her name in a rough, stilted hand, something she had never expected to do, she told Tyrion. Carefully, she scrawled, "Lena, daughter of Thera," as best she could. Torrin followed, making a simple mark in the shape of a stylized horn. Orek, who was literate in a rudimentary fashion thanks to a ranger he had known in years past, wrote his name in thick strokes. Oh. Rek. To them, the idea of formalizing their agreement in writing was new, but they understood its symbolic power in the Southern tradition. When all was done, Lord Buckler announced the Accord of the Wall complete. A ripple of murmurs passed through the watchers. Some seemed impressed, others uncertain. King Bran dipped his head. Let it be known throughout the 6 kingdoms that the free folk are recognized as neighbors beyond the wall, not enemies to be hunted. So long as they abide by this peace, we shall abide by ours. May it endure for generations. A polite applause followed, somewhat muted. Tyrion couldn't help smiling. It was done, officially at least. They would still need to secure the North's acceptance. But the crown had shown its hand. There was no turning back unless some great crisis forced it. He felt a sense of accomplishment, yet he also knew the real work was just beginning. This parchment alone wouldn't erase hatred from every heart. After the ceremony, the king's retinue and the small council withdrew to discuss next steps. The free folk delegates were left standing with Tyrion in the corridor outside the throne room. Torrin's eyes were bright, as though he couldn't believe what had just transpired. It's done, he said, voice hushed. All these lords signing a paper that says they won't come north to kill us. Will their men really obey? Tyrion exhaled. Most will, as long as the king upholds it and they see no profit in attacking. Those who might defy it can be brought to heel by the crown or by the combined force of the Watch and other loyal houses. It won't be perfect, but it's a start. Lena leaned against a wall, crossing her arms. We'll have to send word to our people. Let them know this happened. She frowned. But the distance is great. It'll take weeks, months. Many clans roam or shift camps. Jon Snow will help, Tyrion offered. He can spread the word from Castle Black. And your people can do the same. Perhaps even build a messenger system of your own. Orek nodded thoughtfully. We'll do it. When we return north, we'll carry a copy of the treaty if you can make one for us. Show it to the chieftains. Tyrion promised to see that they received an official copy with the royal seal. A sense of pride glowed in him at the thought of how far they'd come from the day they'd met in the Watchtower to standing in the seat of Southern power forging alliances once deemed impossible. He was about to guide them toward the keep's courtyard when a voice called his name. He turned to see Podrick Payne approaching, along with a younger man in the garb of a steward. Podrick smiled, but his tone was apologetic. Lord Tyrion, the king requests your presence in his solar. He wants a word with you and the delegates if they're willing. He asked that it be private. Tyrion exchanged a glance with the free folk. They shrugged. We have nothing to hide, Torrin said. Then lead on, Tyrion told Podrick. They followed him through a winding series of passages. The Red Keep still confounded the free folk, who looked up at the vaulted ceilings and tapestries with wary awe. Eventually, they arrived at a door guarded by 2 silent Kingsguard. Podrick pushed it open and ushered them inside. The chamber was small, furnished with a few chairs, a table, and a window overlooking Blackwater Bay. King Bran sat by the window, his hands resting on the arms of his wheeled chair. He wore simpler attire now, free of the formal robes, just dark clothes trimmed in the stark colors. He turned his head to greet them. Your Grace, Tyrion said, dipping his head. The free folk inclined theirs respectfully, though they still made no bow. Bran gazed at them with that calm, otherworldly composure. Tyrion had grown used to it, but he recalled how unsettling it could be for newcomers. Thank you for coming, Bran said quietly. Please sit. He gestured to the chairs around the table. Once they were settled, Tyrion taking a seat, the free folk perching carefully, Bran continued. I wish to speak with you in private, outside the formalities of court. There is one matter left that concerns me. The presence of certain forces beyond the wall that might still threaten us all if we're not vigilant. Lena lifted a brow. The dead are gone. We all fought them together. You saw the battle outside Winterfell. Bran inclined his head in acknowledgement. Yes, the White Walkers were defeated, their power undone. But in the darkest corners of the lands beyond the wall, remnants may still stir. I've seen visions, scattered whites that never made it to the main host, creatures that wander aimlessly. Perhaps they are no more than a handful, but they could pose danger if they grow in number. There are also powers older than the Walkers or separate from them that might still lurk. Torrin shifted in his seat, exchanging a look with Auric. We've heard tales of dead men walking far in the icy wastes, but we assumed they were just that, tales. Bran's gaze was distant, as if peering through time and space. I can't be sure how many remain or if they pose any real threat, but I sense pockets of restlessness. This realm cannot endure another onslaught like the last war, so we must remain prepared. If you hear rumors, or if your people find strange happenings, I ask that you alert the Night's Watch, or me, so we can act swiftly. Lena's expression was grim. If we see any sign of the dead returning, we'll send word. We have no wish to fight them again. We lost too many. Bran turned to Tyrion. And you, Tyrion, you understand the importance of vigilance. The memory of the long night must not fade. The free folk could be our first line of warning if anything beyond the wall stirs. Tyrion nodded. Of course, Your Grace. We'll ensure the Watch keeps lines of communication open. We won't be caught off guard again. A solemn hush filled the chamber. The notion that the dead might still linger was disconcerting even after all these years. Tyrion tried to draw a measure of reassurance from the knowledge that the White Walker's main power had been shattered, that the Night King was gone. But if Bran said there might be whites or other ancient evils in the far north, it was not a prophecy to ignore. Bran's voice softened. We have just signed a peace. Let us keep that peace by remembering how fragile life can be. You, the free folk, are as much a part of this realm's future as those born south of the wall. We stand together against the dark. Auric inclined his head. We'll remember. Thank you, Bran said simply. He paused as if considering what else to say, then dismissed them with a mild gesture. You may go. May the gods old and new guide you. They rose, offering quiet farewells, and departed. Outside the chamber, Torrhen exhaled. That man is eerie but not unkind. Tyrion almost laughed. He was once a boy named Bran Stark, crippled by a fall. Many journeys later, he became something more. Don't let his manner unnerve you too much. He sees more than we do. Lena looked pensive. He truly believes some evil stirs in the north? It's possible, Tyrion replied, but it may be small enough that we can handle it if it appears. For now, let's focus on what we've accomplished. They spent another few days in King's Landing, collecting their copy of the treaty, finalizing minor details with Lord Buckler, and making preparations for the return journey. The free folk were eager to leave the city's oppressive crowds and watchful eyes, while Tyrion found himself torn between relief at concluding their mission and a swirl of uncertainty over how the realm would react in the long run. Word of the accord had already begun to spread through the capital. Lords from the Reach and the Westerlands grumbled about the crown's leniency toward wildling raiders. Some knights from the Stormlands questioned how the king's justice would be enforced so far away. Yet the official seal carried weight, and King Bran's authority was not easily gainsaid. One evening, as Tyrion readied his belongings, Samwell Tarly visited him in his chambers. Sam wore a thoughtful frown. Tyrion, you'll be heading north again soon? Yes. I'll accompany Torrhen, Lena, and Auric at least as far as Winterfell. After that, we'll see. I want to ensure they can speak directly with Lady Sansa if she's returned. I suspect she'll come around to the treaty. She values peace in the north. Sam nodded, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. I want you to have something. Or, more accurately, for you to carry it to Castle Black. It's a collection of notes and sketches I've made on advanced healing poultices for frostbite, plus a brief treatise on simpler cultivation methods for hardy vegetables in cold climates. Maester Wolkan contributed too before he left the Citadel. It may help the free folk if they need new ways to deal with the winter's bite. Tyrion accepted the bundle with a growing smile. This is exactly the sort of thing that can help build trust, knowledge that saves lives. Thank you, Sam. He gave a bashful shrug, beaming. I just hope it's useful. I also plan to start a record of the free folks' traditions to preserve them. Maybe one day we'll combine them into the realm's official histories. People should know more about them than just the old scare stories. Tyrion placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. Maester Tarly, you have the heart of a true scholar. Keep it up. The realm needs more of your kind. Sam left, seeming pleased. Tyrion tucked the bundle safely among his belongings, reflecting on how small acts of shared knowledge could mean more in the long run than any treaty. The next day, he and the free folk said their farewells to the King's Landing officials. Bran did not appear in person, but Podrick Payne relayed the king's good wishes for the journey. Bronn, with a mocking grin, pressed a small purse of coin into Tyrion's hand. For the road, he quipped, just in case. Tyrion accepted it graciously. Lord Buckler assured him that any urgent messages from the north would be swiftly delivered to the crown. They set out through the city gates, once again drawing stares from passers-by, though this time with a bit less hostility. Perhaps the news had spread that these were official delegates, or perhaps the novelty had simply worn off. Tyrion was content to leave the cramped streets behind. The free folk also looked visibly relieved once the outskirts of the city gave way to open roads. And so, accompanied by a handful of watchmen, they rode north. The journey back mirrored the southward trip, but with a lighter sense of purpose. Now they carried the accord in their saddlebags, a paper that might change the shape of relations between the realms forever. When they stopped at inns or villages, Tyrion found that rumors had indeed traveled faster than them. Some folk were skeptical, but many were curious. A few even asked the free folk delegates about the new peace, though from a distance. Others kept their heads down, muttering that it was none of their business so long as trouble didn't come near their homes. One evening, in a small tavern near the edge of the riverlands, Tyrion overheard a farmer's wife recounting the story of how the wildling ambassadors had dined in the Red Keep with the king. She spoke in hushed awe as though the free folk were nearly mythical. Tyrion smiled to himself. That sense of myth could be harnessed for good if it made people approach the free folk with wonder instead of fear. They pressed on, crossing the neck with relative ease. The road was muddy in places, but the small garrison at Moat Cailin let them pass without issue. As they neared Winterfell, they heard that Queen Sansa was indeed in residence, having returned from a tour of the distant northern holds. Tyrion was glad. His old bond with Sansa was complicated. He had once been wed to her under dreadful circumstances, yet he had always tried to treat her kindly. Since the war's end, they'd parted on cautious but respectful terms. She had grown into a strong ruler, the queen in the north. Her acceptance of the treaty was crucial. They arrived at Winterfell in the early evening. The sky glowed pink and gold behind the sturdy walls. The guards recognized Tyrion and greeted him more warmly than they had the first time. They also acknowledged the free folk delegates, albeit with quiet caution. The courtyard bustled with men and women finishing their day's labors. As they dismounted, Tyrion noticed the presence of more activity than during his previous visit, Sansa's retinue, presumably, and various northern lords paying homage. Stable hands took the horses, and a steward appeared to guide Tyrion and the delegates inside, explaining that Queen Sansa would grant them audience shortly. They were escorted into the great hall, which thrummed with the warmth of torches and the ever-present hot springs that radiated heat through the floors. At the far end, on a modest wooden dais, sat Sansa Stark in a high-backed chair carved with dire wolf motifs. She wore furs and a gown of deep gray, her red hair half-braided, half-flowing down her back. She was flanked by a handful of northern lords, Glover, Manderly, perhaps a representative of House Serwyn. Tyrion bowed deeply out of respect, and the free folk again inclined their heads but did not bow. Sansa stood, her eyes roving over them with measured calm. "Welcome back to Winterfell," she said to Tyrion, then turned her gaze to the free folk. "And welcome to you as well. I've been told of your mission and of the accord." Tyrion stepped forward. "Your Grace, thank you for seeing us. As you know, King Bran has signed a treaty recognizing peace with the free folk, and we desire your endorsement. Without the North's cooperation, the arrangement along the wall would be tenuous." Sansa nodded, her posture regal. "I received the raven from King's Landing. I know the broad details. I would hear them from you directly and from the free folk themselves." Lena took a small step forward. "I am Lena, daughter of Thera from beyond the wall. We seek an end to the old conflicts. We want to trade peacefully, travel without fear of being slaughtered for crossing a border. In exchange, we pledge we won't raid or threaten your lands. We already swore this oath before King Bran." Sansa regarded her carefully. "My father, Eddard Stark, once tried to treat wildlings with fairness, though he upheld his duty as Warden of the North. Jon Snow did more than that. He fought beside you, marched with you, even bled for you." Her voice softened slightly. "If Jon believes in this peace, that carries weight with me. But the North has its own will. Will all the clans in the far north honor the agreement, or only some?" Torrhen answered, "Only some, at least at first. But that's the nature of our people. We don't have a single ruler. However, the clans that stand together outnumber those that don't. Enough to keep trouble in check." Sansa listened, tapping her fingers lightly on the arm of her chair. Robert Glover and the other northern lords exchanged glances. Finally, Sansa addressed Tyrion again. "I understand that King Bran renounced any southern claim to the land beyond the wall. What about the gift? That land south of the wall has always been under the protection of Winterfell, held for the Night's Watch's use." Tyrion explained how the new treaty provided that the Watch would continue to hold the gift so long as they permitted free folk to cross under agreed conditions with designated areas for trade or settlement if needed. Sansa's expression remained thoughtful. And do the Watchmen themselves accept this arrangement? I know some remain bitter about wildling raids in the past. They follow Jon's lead, Tyrion said. He's already put measures in place. Besides, the Watch is a shadow of its former size. They need allies, not more enemies. Sansa's gaze drifted, perhaps remembering battles of the recent war. At last, she turned to the assembled northern lords. You've heard the terms. House Manderly, House Glover, what say you? Lord Manderly, a portly man with a neatly trimmed beard, spoke first. White Harbor lost men to wildling raids over the centuries, but we also remember how free folk fought bravely in the war against the dead. If this treaty prevents further bloodshed, I'm inclined to support it. Trade is always welcome. Glover, who had greeted Tyrion upon his first arrival, nodded reluctantly. I have reservations, but if the crown stands behind this and Queen Sansa believes it's wise, House Glover will not oppose it. Sansa listened to both, then addressed the hall. My father taught me that the North remembers. We remember grievances, but we also remember debts of honor. Jon Snow and the free folk saved Winterfell from the army of the dead. That is a debt. If we can repay it by forging a peace that spares future generations more war, I will do so. Let all know that I, Sansa Stark, Queen in the North, endorse the Accord of the Wall. A ripple of murmured assent followed among the lords. Tyrion felt an immense weight lift from his shoulders. This final piece was falling into place. The free folk delegates exchanged relieved glances. They had cleared a major hurdle. Sansa's blessing meant the North would not stand in the way, ensuring the accord was practically and symbolically binding on both sides of the wall. Sansa then descended from the dais, indicating the formality was at an end. She approached Tyrion directly. Her eyes, a piercing blue, held a complexity of emotions that Tyrion couldn't fully parse. At last, she spoke softly, so only he and a few nearby could hear. I never thought I'd see you again in Winterfell. It's strange. Tyrion bowed his head respectfully. Strange, but perhaps in a good way. We've both traveled far from who we once were. She nodded. Indeed. I'm glad you succeeded in your mission. Jon's dream of peace with the free folk, he would be relieved to see it come true. Will you tell him that? Tyrion asked gently. The next time you speak? Sansa's expression flickered with sorrow and pride. If I see him, Jon keeps his distance, content at the wall. But perhaps if he learns of this success, he'll feel free to return for a visit. She paused, then added, Thank you, Tyrion, for doing what needed to be done. Tyrion forced a small smile. I did only what seemed right after all the wrongs we've endured. If it helps heal the realm, I'm content. She inclined her head, stepping back as the northern lords came forward to ask more practical questions about how the treaty would be enforced. Lena, Torrhen, and Orek fielded these inquiries as best they could, leaning on Tyrion for translation of southern terms. The atmosphere, if not warm, was at least civil. That was more than Tyrion had dared hope for a year ago. They stayed at Winterfell for some days more, giving Sansa time to have the official northern endorsement set to parchment. During that time, the free folk roamed the castle more at ease than before, sampling northern ale, comparing stories with watchmen who had come south for supplies. The watchmen, in turn, started to see them less as foes and more as potential comrades. A few nights, they shared a fire in the courtyard, singing and drinking. Tyrion watched from a window, quietly astonished at how far they had come. When they finally resolved to journey back beyond the wall, Sansa offered them supplies of grain, dried meats, and furs, a gesture of goodwill. Torrhen was visibly moved. Lena accepted the gifts with a nod, though still maintaining that proud reserve. Orek, as usual, said little, but his eyes conveyed gratitude. Tyrion gave Sansa one last bow, and she clasped his hand in a respectful farewell. They parted with no illusions. They were not close, but they shared mutual respect, forged in survival and shaped by a sense of responsibility to the realm. The route north took them once again to Castle Black. The roads were quieter now, though the watch for bandits remained. Tyrion used the time to finalize his own thoughts on how to handle the next stage, ensuring the free folk received the support needed to spread word of the accord among their clans. By the time they saw the towering wall come into view, a sense of finality crept into Tyrion's heart. This was the end of the formal mission, but the beginning of a new era. Jon Snow awaited them in the courtyard of Castle Black. He stood beside Ghost, the direwolf's red eyes peering out from beneath thick white fur. Jon wore the black cloak of the Watch, though it was battered by wind and weather. The moment Tyrion and the free folk dismounted, Jon strode forward to greet them, relief plain on his face. He clasped Tyrion's forearm, then embraced Torrhen, Lena, and Orek in turn, a warm, wordless gesture that reminded Tyrion how deeply Jon cared about these people. You did it, Jon said quietly, taking in Tyrion's nod. I heard a raven from Sansa, but I wanted to see you with my own eyes. Tyrion handed over the official copy of the accord, complete with King Bran's seal, the North's endorsement, and the signatures. Jon read it silently, lips tightening into a half-smile. We have a chance now, he said softly, voice thick with emotion. A chance to live without fear. Ghost leaned against his leg, and Jon absently ruffled the direwolf's fur. He beckoned them all inside. The men of the watch regarded the free folk with curiosity, some with unease, but they held their tongues. Jon assembled them in the main hall, where a fire burned in the central hearth. Torrhen read aloud from the treaty with the help of a watchman scribe who had better reading skills. Cheers broke out from some of the younger watchmen who had grown up hearing tales of endless conflict. Others stood in thoughtful silence, as if uncertain how to feel. Over the next few days, the free folk ambassadors conferred with Jon about the best way to distribute copies or carry the message to the Wild North. Runners would be sent along with new guides from the Watch to spread word. Some supplies from Sansa's gifts were earmarked for a trek up the Milkwater to find scattered clans. They all agreed it would take time, but the seeds were planted. Meanwhile, Tyrion found himself restless. He had accomplished what he set out to do, but he was not quite sure where he belonged now. Each night, he roamed the walls of Castle Black, recalling his first visit so many years ago when he was just a curious dwarf from the south wanting to see the fabled wall. Now, he had seen far more than he ever imagined. He watched the northern lights flicker in the sky some evenings, thinking about the fragility of peace. Late one night, Jon found him standing alone on the ramparts, leaning over the parapet to gaze into the darkness. The air was bitterly cold, but Tyrion found it oddly comforting, a reminder of how far he'd traveled both literally and in spirit. Jon stood beside him, silent for a time. I suppose you'll go back south soon, Jon said eventually. Tyrion let out a long breath. I was thinking about that. There's no pressing matter drawing me back to King's Landing. The realm has Bran and his council. They don't need a meddlesome dwarf overshadowing them. But what else can I do up here? Jon considered. You could stay a while. Help ensure the treaty's set in motion. You've become a friend to the free folk more than you realize. Tyrion looked at Jon's face, saw the sincerity there. I'm not certain they'd welcome me forever, but perhaps a time, yes. At least to help liaise between you and King Bran. I owe it to them and to you. Jon nodded, letting a small smile break across his worn features. I think that would be wise. The free folk trust you. So do I. They stood there, letting the wind swirl snow around their feet. Tyrion thought of his father, Tywin Lannister, who would have scoffed at the idea of a Lannister living among wildlings, forging peace with them. In that moment, Tyrion felt a surge of quiet pride in having defied his father's legacy. Perhaps he had finally done something truly good beyond the machinations of court and the pursuit of power. Very well, Tyrion said. I'll stay for a time. See this process through. Though I might complain about the cold daily to keep my spirits up. Jon chuckled softly. I'd expect nothing less. We're short on wine up here, but we can improvise. They lingered a while longer, watching the distant glow of the aurora flicker in shifting curtains of green and white. Below them lay the vast, silent expanse of the true north, untamed, beautiful, and harsh. Tyrion's mind roamed over what lay beyond that horizon. The free folk's future, the realm's future, and perhaps new paths for himself as well. In that quiet moment, he felt a rare sense of peace, as though the night itself approved of the fragile alliance they had wrought. And so began a new chapter. Tyrion Lannister, once Hand of the King, once scorned as a drunken dwarf, now standing at the wall to safeguard a bold dream of unity. Jon Snow, exiled and yet indispensable, bridging the gap between the Night's Watch and the free folk he had come to love. The free folk themselves, forging their own destiny in a realm that had finally acknowledged their place as neither vassals nor enemies, but equals. The ghosts of the past still lingered, wounds and grudges would take time to heal, but for the first time in living memory, the border between the known world and the wild north was not defined by perpetual strife. Instead, it held the promise of something new, something hopeful. Weeks stretched into months. The free folk ambassadors returned to their people, carrying official copies of the accord, guiding watch rangers to clan gatherings. Some chieftains embraced the new era, others remained wary, but at least they kept their axes lowered for now. Jon oversaw repairs to Eastwatch by the Sea, setting up rudimentary stalls where merchants from the south might one day trade with the free folk. At Castle Black, Tyrion busied himself with accounts, figuring out how best to ration the food Sansa had sent, how to structure the first trades in furs and ivory so the wildlings wouldn't feel cheated, how to maintain a fair exchange rate in a land in use to coin. His nights often ended by the hearth in the common hall, sharing stories or hashing out arguments with watchmen and wildlings alike. Torin, Lena, and Aura came and went, coordinating efforts. Sometimes they vanished for weeks on end, venturing deep into the Frostfangs or across the haunted forests to speak with distant kin. Each time they returned, they brought back more tales, small enclaves that agreed to peace or pockets of resistance from Varl's clan. Yet no large-scale violence erupted. The memory of the long night was still fresh enough to keep most from risking another war. During this time, Tyrion received occasional ravens from King's Landing courtesy of Samwell Tarly or Lord Buckler, inquiring about progress or offering gentle suggestions. He responded in turn, detailing how the accord was taking root. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a new normal took shape. Watch patrols encountered free folk hunting parties and shared a word of greeting instead of arrows. Clans occasionally passed through the wall to gather supplies at the gift, paying in goods or trade rather than blood. It was fragile, yes, but also astonishing. One evening, as the last gloaming of sunlight vanished behind the horizon, Tyrion found himself at the top of the wall with Jon. They had climbed the creaking elevator to watch the shimmering northern lights. The wind roared around them, bitter and cutting, but the view was unparalleled. For miles in every direction, the land spread out in a patchwork of silver and black beneath the moonlight. Down below, torches glowed at Castle Black. Beyond that, the wide darkness of the North beckoned. Jon stood with Ghost at his side, the direwolf's fur ruffling in the gusts. Tyrion leaned on the ice block parapet, recalling the first time he had stood here so many years ago. Then it had been an exotic wonder. Now it was home in a strange way. A place where men were not so different, where the line between wildling and crow blurred into something new. "It's been nearly a year since we set out on that mad expedition," Tyrion said, his breath misting in the cold. "Would you have thought we'd come this far?" Jon smiled faintly, glancing toward Ghost. "Part of me always hoped. After everything we lost, it felt like we deserved a chance at peace. But yes, it surprises me too." Down below, in the courtyard, Tyrion could just make out the shape of a wildling trader's cart, loaded with furs, conversing with a watchman. A memory flashed in his mind of that night around the fire at the watchtower, forging a plan. They had done it, or at least they were doing it. The possibility of a better future stood before them, as open and vast as the snowy horizon. "Here's to the future, then," Tyrion said, raising an imaginary cup. "May it be less bloody than the past." Jon nodded, gaze thoughtful. "And may we stand together when the cold winds blow again." They lapsed into companionable silence. The wall groaned with the shift of ancient ice, and overhead, the green curtains of the aurora shimmered in waves. With the night sky unfolding in silent beauty, Tyrion felt the extraordinary truth of this moment. Men once divided by centuries of hatred were now forging a single path. The realm had bent before winter and darkness, but it had not broken. And if its people could stand side by side, free folk and southerners alike, then maybe no storm, no matter how fierce, could extinguish that flame of unity again. He closed his eyes, letting the wind whip against his cheeks, feeling the cold not as a threat but as an affirmation that he was alive. They all were. Above him spread the vast tapestry of stars, and below, a world slowly learning to heal. Tomorrow there would be more work, more arguments, more negotiations. But tonight, in that hush upon the wall, Tyrion allowed himself the rare luxury of believing that perhaps, just perhaps, they had done something good. And for once, that might be enough.